Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Environmental Planning Commission meeting of March 15th, 2023. I now call the meeting to order at 7:03 p.m. This evening, we will have interpretation services in Spanish and Chinese for item 5.1 via Zoom. The Zoom translator function, identified as a globe, is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please click the globe and select the language you prefer, English or Spanish or Chinese. If you do nothing, you will hear English deliberation, but you will not be able to hear English translation of Spanish or Chinese speaker public comment. Please welcome Anna Jimenez and Ivy Shu, who will be providing the translation services tonight. Anna, I turn it over to you to provide the Spanish language instructions on how to set up the interpretation function.
Buenas noches a todos y gracias por venir a la reunión del Comité de Planificación Ambiental. Si es que va a ocupar interpretación al español, por favor seleccione el globo al inferior de su pantalla que dice interpretación y seleccione español. Gracias.
Ivy, I turn it over to you.
晚上好，欢迎参加今晚的环境规划委员会会议。今晚我们将为议程第 5.1 项提供西班牙文和中文翻译服务。Zoom 翻译器功能标识为地球仪，位于 Zoom 屏幕的底部。请点击地球仪并选择中文。如果您什么都不选择，会听到英文，但您将听不到中文的翻译。谢谢。
For those joining us in person, please note that due to our hybrid environment, audio and video presentations can no longer be shared from the lectern. Requests to show an audio or video presentation during a meeting should be directed to epc@mountainview.gov by 4:30 p.m. on the meeting date. Additionally, due to our hybrid environment, we will no longer have speakers line up to speak on an item. Anyone wishing to address the EPC in person must complete a yellow speaker card. Please indicate the name you would like to be called by when it is your turn to speak and the item number on which you wish to speak. Please complete one yellow speaker card for each item on which you wish to speak and turn them into the EPC clerk as soon as possible, but no later than the call for public comment on the item you are speaking on. Instructions for addressing the commission virtually may be found on the posted agenda. Now I'll ask the EPC clerk to proceed with roll call.
All commissioners are present.
Thank you. Now on to item 3.1, Environmental Planning Commission meeting minutes of March 1st, 2023. We'll start with the EPC discussion, if there is any comments? No, seeing none, we will go to public comment. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on the minutes, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on the minutes, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. EPC clerk, are there any yellow cards?
No comments on this item.
Thank you. So do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you. We can then take a vote. Oh, yes, we have a second.
Excuse me, I moved on this Legistar system. So if I can withdraw it and
that's okay.
That's fine. I'll withdraw.
Okay, shall I?
So do we have a motion from Commissioner Gutierrez and a second
from
by
Commissioner Clark?
Commissioner Clark, great, thank you.
And just to confirm, the voting system is functioning, or do we need to do a roll call on this item? Okay, great.
Mine is not.
Let's try one more time.
It was, I think someone just needs to press.
Oh, Commissioner Gutierrez, yeah, do you mind? Mm-hmm.
There we go.
I am not seeing it come up, so if the chair doesn't mind, I'll go ahead and do a roll call vote.
Yes, please.
Okay. And can we confirm the mover and second?
Yes. The mover is Commissioner Gutierrez, and the seconder is Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Cranston?
Aye.
Commissioner Gutierrez?
Aye.
Commissioner Haymeyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Nunez?
Aye.
Vice Chair Dempsey?
Aye.
And Chair Yin.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Now on to oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the EPC on matters not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the commission from acting on non-agenda items. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on non-agenda items, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on non-agenda items, please click the raise hand button on Zoom, in Zoom, or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. EPC clerk, are there any yellow cards for non-agenda items?
No comments for non-agenda items.
Okay, then we will close that and move on to the public hearing, item 5.1, 2023 to 2031 housing element. Now, normally public hearings have a different order, but due to the complexity of this project and the need for conflict of interest recusals, we're going to hold the items in this order. First, we'll have staff presentation followed by public comment, and at the closure of public comment, we'll then have the commission ask questions and deliberate and then take action. So we'll first have the staff presentation by Ellen Yao, project planner.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Chair Yin and Commissioners. Before you this evening for your consideration is the 6th cycle housing element. This is for the period of 2023 to 2031. My name is Ellen Yao, and I'm the project planner. I'm joined here tonight with Eric Anderson, my advanced planning manager. Also here with us is our consultant, Stephanie Hager from BAE, and Bev Choi from ESA. I will go over the latest comments we received. I'm going to highlight council direction received in December, HCD comments, and overall community feedback that we received on the December draft. Then I will also provide an overview of the changes to the draft, specifically in the 2 major components of the housing element, that is the sites inventory and the programs. Lastly, I will go over the next steps and recommendations for the project. On December 13th, Council accepted EPC's recommendation on the draft and did not add additional sites or program modifications. However, Council directed staff to make the following changes to the November draft before resubmitting to HCD. First, for the sites inventory, we reduced the number of total projected units included in the sites inventory for the 1500 North Shoreline Boulevard property to reflect what could be expected to be built within the housing element period. For AFFH, was to include a program to eliminate parking requirements for 100% affordable housing and to preserve retail and other shopping centers. This is also included in our programs as well. And then if HCD determined that the proposed sites inventory didn't meet AFFH requirements, to consider city-owned property. So based off of the council direction, staff made changes to the November draft on these comments. And then we made the revised December draft available to the public on December 22nd and resubmitted to HCD on January 4th. So this meant that HCD reviewed 2 versions within the 60-day review period. During that review period, again, we submitted 2 drafts. We got the formal comment letter on January 17th. HCD included these comments, including sites inventory, AFFH programs, and some other program refinements. The comments included recategorizing pipeline projects that didn't have any preliminary or informal applications submitted. So we recategorized it from pipeline to opportunity sites. Because we were required to do that, that meant that we had additional analysis needed for non-vacant sites. So we had to demonstrate that existing uses on these non-vacant sites would not impede residential development. We also reevaluated the site's inventory to ensure that the inventory would meet the AFFH goals. And then we added additional metrics specifically to Program 1.4 to highlight unit production targets. Lastly, HCD also had comments to ensure that we included all segments of the community, particularly those with limited English proficiency. So to sum up our December draft and the revisions, so each of HCD's comments highlighted here and council direction highlighted in the last slide, all of that was considered and we made revisions to the latest draft that is before you tonight. In the next part of this presentation, I will go over the sites inventory and program changes. So here you'll see a chart of our updated 6-cycle sites inventory and a map that shows the low income, moderate income, and mixed income sites throughout the city. So again, for the inventory changes, based off of the comments, we recategorized pipeline projects, we rezoned back pocket sites, and then we also made minor modifications to remove or add sites based on new information from property owners. As you can see on this chart, the buffer ranges are within HCD's recommended of 15 to 30%. I want to also highlight that if there's new information that arises during our approval or certification process after this meeting, these changes can be addressed administratively in consultation with HCD, and that clause is included in the resolution before you tonight. As I said, because we had to recategorize some sites into the opportunity sites, we have to do a non-vacant site analysis. So under housing element law, if we rely on non-vacant sites to accommodate 50% or more of lower income RENA units, the housing element must provide evidence to show that the current use won't impede residential development. Generally, the evidence can be comprised of various factors that make it a unique site to be categorized as an opportunity site. But typically it falls into 3 major categories, which is shown on the screen right here. First is market and development trends. This will reflect existing uses on the site that has similar characteristics to projects that have gone through the entitlement and approval process. And it shows that, usually they're older buildings or properties with low floor area ratios and therefore are very likely to redevelop. Another is if there's site-specific information. That's specifically if we've gotten letters from property owners stating that they do have interest in doing so and redeveloping. And then lastly, on the city side, if there's city commitment to programs to facilitate that development of the site. So that could be in providing funding or utilizing dedicated land, for example, some of the East Evelyn project sites. So this information is included in Program 4.5 under programs for the city commitments. And then the analysis itself is in Appendix E of the housing element. Okay, now we're going to go into the bulk and the meat of the project, which are the programs. The housing element is a result of many months of analysis, outreach, policy development, multiple meetings with EPC and council. And so, we sit on a very robust foundation of Mountain View efforts. This includes existing housing policies and many other housing program successes. So the housing element is comprised of 4 major goals. You can see on the screen here, I'm just gonna go over them. We have goal 1, which is an increase in the quantity and diversity of housing options, mainly to focus housing options in very active areas and walkable neighborhoods with amenities and services available to those housing developments. Goal 2 is to ensure that we have an inclusive and equitable community that has available and accessible housing assistance programs. Goal 3, to ensure that we have a comprehensive suite of housing opportunities and services to prevent, respond to, and address displacement and homelessness. And lastly, for the city, we want to ensure that we are, as an entity, an effective steward of housing solutions. And that means funding, advocacy, partnerships, and overall community outreach and engagement. So each of these 4 goals is associated with a broad range of programs that is highlighted in Chapter 3 of the housing element, and we are required to strive and complete those programs within the cycle. So the next several slides will go over the program changes that we've made since the December draft. Again, this includes HCD's response letter received on January 17th, council direction, and all the community outreach thus far and community input that we have. So staff has been working with various stakeholder groups, and we've revised these programs to address those issues. On the following slides, you'll see the public comment on the left and on the right what city action we've taken. This is highlighted in the staff report as well, but this is just an overview and a summary, so a little bit more detail is included in the staff report, and you can see the direct changes in the red line version of the housing element. So first, to program 1.1, and we've organized this based off the program changes. So for program 1.1, people had interest in back pocket sites being rezoned. So we added those back pocket sites, and we are rezoning other areas that have been identified in the back pocket. We are also preserving and adding language for preservation standards to neighborhood commercial shopping centers. And then we also allow emergency shelters by right, which is consistent with state law AB 2339, which took into effect at the beginning of this year. In program 1.2, public comment included eliminating parking requirements in residential development throughout the city. So originally this was just to eliminate parking requirements for 100% affordable based off of council direction. With the additional feedback, we've made those changes to also exempt parking for residential projects in transit-oriented areas. These mostly target precise plans areas, and then also for those that are outside of the precise plan areas to include exemptions if those projects can provide enhanced transportation demand management measures. Projects usually are required to provide those TDMs, but if they're able to go above and beyond, then those parking exceptions are available to them. In program 1.3, we added language clarifying economic feasibility and the cumulative effects of standards to ensure that we can strive to reduce constraints to housing development. That was a major concern that we heard from the community, to ensure that they can build to their allowable density and ensure economic feasibility for these projects. We also received comments regarding development process, such as adding in exemptions to the gatekeeper process or eliminating the process overall. There's a lot of different comments on that. So the changes that we made was to review additional gatekeeper exemptions. There are some that are already listed in the municipal code. We are also committing to holding one gatekeeper meeting annually. And then we also included a review of R2 sites throughout the city. These will be special considerations to focus on high opportunity areas and areas near transit and services. And this is because right now with SB 9, R1 properties do have the ability to have higher density than just a duplex. And so this is kind of reevaluating our existing code and development standards. You guys are quite familiar with program 1.4. We've had this at the beginning of essentially our first draft, but we had interest in increasing the density number in the previous draft and also adding additional metrics and objectives. So we added 65 units proposed on these religious and institutional sites south of El Camino with a time frame of 2027. We also clarified that there will be additional actions if these units don't happen. So it's kind of a continual process. We'll do outreach first. If we're not able to get those units, then we'll continue to look at what policy changes are necessary to make that happen. 1.8 is for the Parkland Ordinance update. Some of the comments we received circled around how park in lieu fees were calculated, the concerns that the cumulative impacts of all fees for projects made projects infeasible. So this program specifically targets how we can reduce the cumulative impact of fees as an overall stack, and then also specifically to ensure that the constraint of parkland, which was identified as a high constraint in our analysis, that we can lower residential park in lieu fees. And so to ensure steps to achieving that for this program, we are including a nexus study to find opportunities to lower residential fees. And then after the reduction of those fees, to also reevaluate that cumulative impact. Highlighted here is program 2.1, 2.4, and 2.5. And we received multiple comments from community members having concerns that as AMI increases year by year, incomes also aren't increasing, so they are being outpriced and not able to access the affordable housing. People also had concerns about when they are applying for BMR units, that they are required to provide certain information like social security numbers. And community members also had concerns about the housing laws and housing rights, and where they can ask for assistance and help without concerns about landlord retaliation. So included in these program changes, we revised to clarify that we want to ensure that housing is available to households otherwise left out of the Mountain View housing market. This means including deeper affordability levels for extremely low income households and reducing barriers. And that includes specifically whether the calculation of BMR prices and rents cause a barrier to qualify for those units. Because we heard that assessing these BMR programs is an issue, we included details on how we can remove those barriers. This included increasing our outreach and technical assistance. We have a eviction protection program that meets at the library. So a lot of it is getting the information out. To address landlord retaliation, we are going to be looking at how we can improve those programs of getting outreach and proactively helping tenants who have concerns. 2.6 is specifically for affirmatively furthering fair housing. This program is kind of like a high-level umbrella that captures many other programs listed in our housing plan. So that includes program 1.4 for the church and institutional sites. This includes program 4.5, which is we're doing partnerships with developers to provide affordable housing. So on the left-hand side, you can see we had very specific comments on how we can quantify and ensure that we are furthering fair housing throughout the city. So we've taken those input, and some of the changes that we've highlighted in the program are on the right-hand side. So in program 1.4, we clarified that the metric is 65 units on these sites. This is to further sites south of El Camino. In program 4.5, 65 units of affordable housing in downtown, and if that doesn't come into fruition, we also have next steps to consider city-owned land. And then separately, we're doing another level of no net loss. So RENA, you're required to do a no net loss across the entire RENA household income levels. We're doing one specifically just for lower income in areas south of El Camino. So this gives us a metric of ensuring that lower income units are located south of El Camino. And one other comment was rezoning Moffett Boulevard and the Transit Center, again, locating units in, affordable units in high transit and service areas. So that is updated in program 1.1. Under 3.1 for homelessness prevention and services for the unhoused, we had specific comments about domestic violence and providing shelter for children and women. So we currently right now partner with the county. As part of that, we're looking at how we can expand those partnerships and how we can provide additional funding. Right now it's through CDBG funds. So we'll evaluate that in that program. And then under displacement prevention and mitigation, program 3.2, we had comments about let's ensure that we are measuring how effective these programs are. So we have TREO. So as part of our action, we're looking at measuring how TREO is effective. The metric is ensuring that Mountain View residents who are part of this program going back and ensuring that they're actually being able to be residents of Mountain View, regardless of having to go through relocation efforts. Again, there was concern about local replacement requirements that is being evaluated through our displacement response strategy. So we are again highlighting it under 3.2. And then we had interest in providing funding and support for households experiencing eviction, and specifically looking at amendments for mobile home tenants. They have shared their concerns about increasing rent on their property and on their in their mobile home. So we've included an objective to look at the mobile home rent stabilization ordinance that will reduce the annual allowable rent increases. Under 4.1 is our development streamlining and processing revision. We had requests to specifically include matrix study recommendations and to look at code compliant projects that can go through a ministerial review process. So we will be evaluating which projects, multifamily projects that can be eligible for ministerial approvals. This will streamline development review projects for residential. We are also looking at a lot of implementation for our matrix study recommendations. At the beginning of the process for the housing element, it was hard to identify what those timelines were, but now we have very specific action items listed in the housing element, including those matrix study recommendations. For 4.5, we had comments from HCD and from the community to ensure that we are facilitating opportunity sites development, that tenants right now who are in the RVs on the East Evelyn site, the site was vacant, city-owned. Knowing that we were going to redevelop and knowing that we had this opportunity to use the land in the interim, we have residents there now. We are also looking at transitioning them out. So it was an opportune moment that in between this vacant and the development phase of this site, that we can utilize it for RVs, but knowing that they will have to eventually move on, we are doing transition planning for that. And so we've included that in the housing element, kind of specifying that we will be ensuring that they won't be displaced without a plan. We also heard from community members, especially for affordable housing developments, that certain amenities are accessible, specifically things like food pantries and childcare. And so as part of this program, we will be creating a priority list of important amenities so that when we review projects for affordable development, like through our NOFA projects, we can look for opportunities to incorporate those into the development themselves, or to identify adjacent uses that have parallel benefits to the tenants of the affordable housing developments. And then for neighborhood engagement, we've done actually a lot of translation, as you can see, live interpretation for meetings like this, and translation of our housing element document and staff report for community members. So we're going to continue doing that. Specifically, community members had concerns that they weren't able to access certain programs like Trail because they didn't understand how to utilize it. So as part of our efforts, we'll be working with our city staff to add details about how we can translate and provide information early on for people who have concerns of being displaced. Okay, so that multiple slides later, that captured all of the changes that we made in the draft that's presented before you. You will note that in Exhibit E of Attachment 1, there are modifications, and we are still making some modifications, so you'll see a desk item for additional modifications since the publication of the draft. So in terms of hierarchy, we have the published draft. In the reso, we have additional amendments in Exhibit E, and in front of you is desk item for additional revisions to Exhibit E. So I'm going to go over a few of those changes in the next couple of slides. So, we continue to do our outreach to stakeholders. We're still receiving comments and trying to incorporate them, and you'll see that in those attachments in front of you.
Excuse me, sorry, I'm going to take a moment right now. I know Ellen is in the middle of her presentation. I just want to make a quick announcement to anybody that might be watching on YouTube or somewhere else, trying to get into the Zoom meeting for this. There was a typo on the link for the Zoom meeting on the agenda, and we have posted on the site where you find the agenda online, the list of meetings. If you click the link in the list of meetings that says meeting details, we've posted a new link to the Zoom meeting on that page, on the meeting details page. So anybody watching on YouTube or anybody who knows somebody who's trying to get in, please go to the meeting details page, and there's a link to Zoom meeting that's posted there. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, staff continued outreach to stakeholders over the last several weeks, and so we did identify further edits to the housing element, and these edits specifically address local issues and will provide a more robust housing element. So the changes will be presented in the next couple of slides, and they've also been posted online and emailed to you directly and printed in front of you. So first one is to program 1.3. Again, we had additional comments on how we can reduce and eliminate standards that would constrain economic feasibility. We wanted commitments to very specific, objective, quantifiable policies that will facilitate the development of maximum units on a site. And then they wanted clarification on the R2 upzoning program. So the changes that we've made include adding that language for objective standards, reducing physically constraining standards to make projects feasible, and we also clarified that the R2 project is to increase density to be greater than R1 properties. For the 1.8 Parkland Ordinance update, we had comments about specifying the specific fee reduction and ensuring that we're committing to meaningful action. And then we made that modification on Exhibit E and in your packet in front of you. This includes a specific target fee reduction of at least 20% on average based off of typical residential projects. We also added very specific actions that will be taken under the Nexus study. And to look at, as part of that, to also find other ways that developments can receive park credit. This could be, reducing park fees by relaxing regulations on the size and type of privately owned, publicly accessible areas, also known as POPAs, and or allowing parkland credit for pedestrian connections and trails. For 2.6, we had a request for a very specific metric of 40 units by 2027. And the intent of this comment was to ensure that we had a metric to meet a certain point during our planning period, and then to also ensure that if things didn't pan out, that we would have next steps, which meant continued outreach. And so we added that. That was part of our plan. We just added specific metric and timeline into that program to specify that we would do the additional outreach and the policy changes to reduce affordable housing constraints. For 3.2, displacement prevention and mitigation, we had comments specifying that there was interest in preserving or acquiring 50 units or 5 buildings as a specific metric through tenant cooperatives and or community land trusts. And then to also invest $10 million from the BMR program to support those tenant cooperatives and community land trusts. So we included to acquire and preserve at least 50%, at least 50 housing units that would remain affordable, and then to also develop funding partnerships to invest at least $10 million. And then we also added an action item to create a community ownership plan. So currently we don't have any CLTs, that could take on this work. So the first step is let's work on creating this kind of model or structure so that they can take on the job of preservation acquisition activities in the city. So that covers all of the program changes since January. I want to highlight that, we had an EIR, it was prepared and it was brought to council and certified by council January of this year. I want to highlight that since the certification of the EIR, there have been changes to the housing element, but the changes, as you've known, is slight site inventory changes, modifying some program details, and overall, we have evaluated that those changes to the housing element don't affect the actual conclusions or the analysis captured in the EIR. So we've also included in Exhibit 5 to the staff report a CEQA memo highlighting those changes. As part of tonight's recommendation, the EPC should consider that certified EIR under this new revised housing element. On the slide, you'll see a couple of those key dates that has brought us to today. So we are here tonight to recommend council action. So I want to highlight that we are recommending this specific adoption schedule, that we adopt the housing element without HCD certification. There are several reasons why the timing of that is kind of critical for the city. We have submitted multiple drafts of HCD already, and we've had multiple meetings with HCD staff, and they have supported our process for adopting prior to their certification. We have specifically revised and responded to those comments that HCD has highlighted in their letter. And again, we did talk to HCD, and they stated that since our comments are minimal, that this process of moving forward and getting it adopted prior to their certification does make a lot of sense, because if we were to submit prior to that, it would add on additional time. So some of the issues of if we were not to go through this schedule of tonight's hearing and bring it to council for adoption in April, that would add additional time. Statutorily, they have 60 days to do that review. Because we're at a point where our draft addresses a lot of the community concerns, and HCD only had 3 main categories of comments, it would make sense for us to move forward. Aside from the added time, or because of the added time, we will have additional loss of funding. Right now on the table is about $1 million for housing projects under the Pro-Housing Incentive Program, which will be going to council in April as well. This requires that aside from the $1 million here, there are a lot of other funding opportunities that require a compliant housing element, and those deadlines, come up in April, August, September, and some all the way to December. So, as quickly as possible as approving and adopting the housing element, the better we have in terms of accessing those funding opportunities. And if we are still without a compliant housing element, the city isn't able to deny certain non-compliant projects. This is known as Building Remedies Project, which we've received a couple already. And I do want to highlight, captured in the resolution, HCD is willing to review our draft right now informally between EPC and council. And so if there are remaining issues, we hope to resolve them prior to bringing the draft to council. So in terms of next steps, council will be evaluating this project on April 11th. After that, we will be submitting it to HCD. And again, the review period is 60 days, but we are hoping to meet with HCD before council to address any comments there. And then after council, when we submit it to them, we will continually work and refine it and get a compliant housing element as soon as possible. Again, I want to highlight that our resolution does allow for limited staff changes so that we can ensure HCD compliance and certification. And then once it's adopted, we have programs in our schedule in the housing element plan. Some of those deadlines are coming up in December 2023. And so shown on the screen here is the recommended action for tonight. Again, to consider the 2023-2031 Housing Element Update Environmental Impact Report, and then to also recommend the City Council adopt a resolution amending the general plan to adopt the housing element for the period of 2023 to 2031. So this concludes my presentation, and we look forward to answering any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Planner Yao. This portion of the meeting, let me reread this. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on this item, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. Are there any yellow cards for speakers tonight?
We do have 3 in-person speakers, and then we have a fourth in-person speaker who will actually be providing translation for a Zoom speaker. So maybe we can wait and do that one last. And I believe our protocol is to provide double time for that. But yeah, we do have 3 in-person speakers. So Chris Martinez.
Sorry, before the public speakers begin, I'd just like to remind the audience that there was a typo on the agenda for the Zoom meeting. So want to make sure that anybody watching and online and wants to provide public comment via Zoom, please go to the meeting details page on the website where the agendas are posted, and you will find a new Zoom link there. Thank you.
I'm not sure his mic is on. Here we go.
All right. Good evening. My name is Chris Martinez. I'm a carpenter with Local 405 here out of San Jose. I love this idea. Housing, we need it. It's definitely something we all need. As a construction worker, though, low-income housing is much needed, but sometimes our construction workers are forgot about, and they make just enough money to not get the door open for them for these low-income housings, but they don't make enough money to take the next step up either. So it's just something it's something we have to do with the contractors. We have to hold them to a higher standard. Healthcare benefits, apprenticeship. For me, college was not an option. I just wasn't in the family funds to go to college. The apprenticeship taught me a craft, taught me a trade I can be proud of. A lot of these youths need that, and a lot of these contractors don't give that to these youth. So this nice hall that we're in right now, carpenters, construction workers built it, and I just hate to see the, mistreatment of these construction workers. So when you're moving forward with these projects, it'd be great to hold these contractors and developers to a standard that can lift us all up. And, local hire, super important. I've spent, I don't know how many nights in a hotel room away from my wife and kids watching my kids grow up through the phone. It's so important to make sure that we're getting jobs for the people in the community. It's going to help with your tax revenue anyways, So just things to think about. So hopefully moving forward with these great projects, you guys can hold these contractors and developers to a higher standard. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have the next speaker, please?
Albert Lustve.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Albert Lustre with the Carpenters Local Union 405. I'm here today to see, it's great that we see so many changes to the housing element, but we also got to think about the workforce who's going to build these projects. I'm here to speak about the need of area labor standards implementation to the next housing element. Area standards include livable wage, healthcare, apprenticeship, local hire. The purpose of having a livable wage is because it helps us the working men and women balance the wages with the current inflation of the last 2 years. It's correct in the last 2 years, and provide the basic needs for the family. Since healthcare is a necessity for all humans, we cannot have our neighbors and our community not seek medical attention because their employer failed to provide medical benefits. Instead, they become a burden to the system. Apprenticeship programs, it provides a pathway for minorities, women, at-risk youth into the construction industry, and it gives the opportunity to the working class citizens the skills, craftsmanship to build a project, and also a shot to the American dream. By hiring locally ensures that our citizens have time to spend time with their families, being involved in our community, instead of spending time in the road trying to make ends meet. I would like to ask the community and our elected officials, what are we doing to ensure that we are including these area labor standards in the new housing elements? Are we going to adopt the same area labor standards as our neighborhood cities, Redwood City and Menlo Park, in a new housing element, which include local hire, apprenticeship, and livable wage? Thank you.
Alex Brown.
Hey, friends. I'll keep it brief. You guys know that I love all this. It's so much fun. I could comment on a lot of it, but right now I'm just going to focus on program 3.2 and 2 lines. The mobile home rent stabilization ordinance. We have a lot of working people in the parks. We have a lot of seniors. We have a lot of people who are vulnerable on fixed income. And 5% year over year is what we were fighting to try to stop. The MHRSO is great. I think that it could be improved. There are some regional cities that have tighter protections that they have found would be effective, still provide a fair rate of return, but allow people to stay in their homes longer, be able to afford to continue to live, eat, clothe themselves. So what we're looking for is just a more specific item on a quicker timeline. So something that is urgent because we don't want to be priced out, and that is more specific about what we're, instead of just studying, match regional cities that have strong protections. We know that they can do it. Mountain View has been a leader and can match them or do better. It's up, I know we can do it. Thanks.
We'll move on to our virtual speakers. One moment. B. Hansen, you can start speaking.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to add on top of what Alex just said, we are trying to change those two lines. We appreciate your support on adding your concern about our issues in under 3.2, the housing element. What we'd like to do is change those two items. I think we didn't give city staff enough information previously on what we're trying to do. We're trying to move our AGAs down to 3% with 60% of CPI. And we didn't just grab that, that number out of the air. There are other cities in California that have ordinances that cite those numbers. Antioch, Richmond, Santa Ana, Santa Monica, Oakland, Baldwin Park, and Beverly Hills. Beverly Hills had no Hill Park, or maybe many, if you knew. But basically, we need to get a much better AGA for, especially for our seniors and people on fixed incomes. We also have to move the date that is suggested from 2027 to 2023. Because seniors do not have a finite amount of time to get their space rents down to a useful level, down to a bearable level. So basically, I put all this information in a letter that I sent before the meeting. I'm sure you haven't had time to read it yet. But I hope you'll take a look at it and include it in your recommendation. Thank you.
Kevin Ma, you may start speaking.
Evening, commissioners, staff. My name is Kevin Ma. I'll be representing the League of Women Voters of Los Altos Mountain View area tonight. With the revisions posted today on Exhibit E, as well as a minor change in terms of prioritization of staff for affordable housing in terms of all departments, we are in full support of this document. We thank the city for working hard in these past months to take input from the public to ensure that we are creating a draft that is accountable and enforceable so that we can make a significant change in terms of our housing crisis. And we look forward to the implementation phase over the next 8 years. Thank you.
Tony Rath, go ahead.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and congratulations on the housing elements. I just wanted to highlight the need for a more forward-looking and careful planning, just using a few of the examples here. So for example, the parking requirements that were reduced, I think it makes perfect sense to eliminate them for 100% affordable projects. I do not see that for reducing them or completely eliminating them for residential areas. We already have recent state law changes that remove the minimum parking requirements in Old Mountain View, for example, and we have not seen the impact of that yet. And so by reducing the parking requirements further, it's potentially going to be a real problem for people that live in those areas. I can tell you that on trash day, it's difficult in my area to find parking on the street. So it doesn't take much to take it over the edge. Another thing I wanted to highlight is the inclusion of the back pocket sites in the housing element. So Mountain View already has the largest RENA allocation per capita of any city in Santa Clara County. And not just the largest, it has by far the largest. So it's not really prudent to be adding a whole lot more sites to this without any kind of forward-looking planning for infrastructure and schools, water, what have you. So I think some more, emphasis needs to be put onto that. Another thing I saw is that the in lieu fees are going to be lowered according to the staff proposal. And I've also seen that some of the same groups that support this have asked to develop the Cuesta Park Annex into housing. I just want to point out that the annex was paid for by in lieu fees, so park fees, right? So if that's on the table, what guarantee do the residents have that those in lieu fees that are now reduced are not diverted away from parks in the end? And you know, we need those parks if we're going to have more residents, and the Cuesta Park Annex isn't the perfect space. So I think it really doesn't make any sense to develop it. Thank you.
Matthew Reed.
Matthew Reed.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Matthew Reed. I am the Director of Policy at Silicon Valley at Home. Appreciate this opportunity to speak with you. This is a important evening for you all. It's been a long process. We really need to be very clear to the considerable work that Mountain View City staff, led by Ellen Yao, Eric Anderson, and Arti Shrivastava, have invested in this process. We believe that there's been tremendous good faith and effort in addressing the statutory requirements of the state laws based on the comments that have been received by Department of Housing and Community Development over the past, 6 to 9 months. And we think there's been a tremendous amount of progress. I think you're seeing a level of detail and effort to really address specifically the HCD comments as they speak to the state laws that govern this process in a really substantive way. This has been done in partnership and collaboration with organizations around the city that have really invested a tremendous amount of time and energy in working with city staff to come to a place where there's a housing element that is compliant. We believe that some of the actions taken, like moving the what had been the back pocket sites up into the inventory, were not only good for the city, but were actually required for the city to take in order to address the needs to expand opportunities throughout the city, including downtown and higher resource areas south of El Camino. This was a step that needed to be taken to be compliant. And we're pleased to see that was taken. I'm sure there are difficult decisions that have been made and will have to go through council process. But we think they are going to allow this housing element significantly more likely to be certified. We will have some small comments following this session. There's been a lot of edits in the last couple of days, but we're really here to just express our appreciation for the process and confidence that the discussions with the state have been constructive and clear. And this is very close to getting across the finish line. Thank you.
We have Olga Mello with Sarah Livnot providing translation. Olga?
Can you hear me? Hello. Okay. Buenas noches, comisionados. Gracias por la oportunidad de hablar esta noche. Mi nombre es Olga Melo y hablo en nombre del Fondo de Solidaridad de Mountain View. Fondo de Solidaridad de Mountain View es un grupo de mujeres inmigrantes latinas en Mountain View que apoya el bienestar económico, salud mental y la estabilidad de vivienda en familias latinas en nuestra comunidad. En 2021 formamos el Fondo de Solidaridad y como un fondo de ayuda mutua para apoyar a las familias latinas en recuperación económica. Gracias, redistribuimos con éxito 1 millón de fondos de ayuda para el COVID a 400 familias. Actualmente estamos distribuyendo otros 800,000 a las familias este año. Después de la pandemia, nuestro objetivo principal es mejorar la estabilidad de vivienda a largo plazo de nuestra comunidad de inquilinos de la clase trabajadora de Mountain View. Siguiendo los pasos de otras comunidades en el área de la Bahía y California, al traer fideicomisos comunitarios de tierras y o modelos cooperativos de vivienda equitativa a Mountain View, junto con una política de apoyo hacia Copa y Topa. Respetuosamente, me gustaría sugerirles que se actualice el Housing Element para comprometer recursos y acelerar la investigación y ejecución de estos modelos de vivienda comunitaria, así como comprometerse con los objetivos para reducir el desplazamiento de los inquilinos de clase trabajadora de Mountain View a través de vivienda comunitaria en unidad o nivel edificio. Esperamos revisar los cambios que se realizaron hoy en el elemento de vivienda y discutirlos con el Consejo Municipal. Muchísimas gracias por su atención.
Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Olga Mello, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Fondo de Solidaridad de Mountain View. The Fondo de Solidaridad de Mountain View is a group of Latina immigrant women in Mountain View that supports the economic well-being, mental health, and housing stability of Latino families in our community. In 2021, we formed the Fondo as a mutual aid relief fund to support undocumented Latino families who fell through the cracks of most economic recovery programs. Thanks to the support and trust of the City of Mountain View, we successfully redistributed $1 million in COVID relief funds to 400 families in 2021, and we are currently distributing another $800,000 in relief funds to families this year. Post-pandemic, our main goal is to improve the long-term housing stability of our working-class renter community in Mountain View by following in the footsteps of other communities in the Bay Area and California in bringing the community land trust and limited equity housing cooperative models to Mountain View, along with the supportive COPA-TOPA policy. We would respectfully like to suggest that you update the housing element to commit resources to and accelerate the research and execution of these community housing models, as well as to commit two goals for reducing displacement of Mountain View working class renters via community housing at the unit or building level. We look forward to reviewing the changes that were made to the housing element today and discussing them with the City Council. Thank you very much for your attention.
No additional speakers.
All right, thank you, everybody. At this point, we are going to have EPC ask questions.
No, start with the recusals.
Oh, the recusals are first. Okay. We're going to discuss multiple programs in the housing element that require one or more commissioners to recuse themselves due to conflicts of interest. These programs include Program 1.1, Zoning Ordinance Update for Consistency with State Laws, related to zoning for emergency shelters and rezoning sites for the inventory. Program 1.2, Eliminate Minimum Parking Standards for Residential and Transit-Oriented Areas, Affordable Housing Developments, and Other Cases. And Program 1.3, Review and Update Ordinance and Precise Plan Residential Standards, and Program 1.4, Religious and Community Assembly Sites for Housing. So could the commissioners with conflicts of interest to these specific programs in the housing element please make your recusal statements at this time? Commissioner Gutierrez, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's see here. Man, I should have brought my glasses here. Okay. I'm sorry. I am recusing myself from discussions about Program 1.2, subsection B, whether to eliminate minimum parking requirements for residential development in transit-oriented areas, including the El Camino Real Precise Plan area, due to the proximity of my residence to the El Camino Real Precise Plan area.
Commissioner Clark.
So the good news is we're close enough to the finish line that we're getting into these very specific items, but that also means that there are recusals associated with it. So I'm recusing myself from discussions about program 1.1 subsection F, where it's discussing whether or not to allow emergency shelters by right of way or by right in areas along the El Camino Real Precise Plan area due to my residence being within the El Camino Precise Plan area. Program 1.2 subsection B, whether to eliminate minimum parking requirements for residential development and transit-oriented areas, which includes the El Camino Real Precise Plan area due to my residence being within the El Camino Real Precise Plan area. And program 1.3 subsection H, which is the whether to review and increase density on R2 zone sites due to the proximity of my residence to the R2 zoning district.
Thank you. And that leaves Vice Chair Dempsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I will be recusing myself from discussions about two elements of tonight's housing element. Program 1.1 sub G sub B, whether to rezone certain specified properties in South Mountain View due to the proximity of my residence to two of those sites. And program 1.4, whether to allow affordable multifamily housing on religious or community assembly sites south of El Camino due to the proximity of my residence to one of those lovely churches. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, first we'll address program 1.2, subsection B, regarding eliminating minimum parking requirements for residential development in transit-oriented areas, including the El Camino Real Precise Plans. So I believe Commissioners Gutierrez and Clark will be recusing themselves. At this time, do any members of the Commission have questions or comments regarding eliminating minimum parking requirements for residential development in transit-oriented areas? We have none. Sorry, you do have one. Vice Chair Dempsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a quick question for staff. By removing the requirement for that parking, when we see a development proposal in that area, is there still a traffic impact study that's done? So we'll still end up talking about that, whether the requirement is there or not.
There will be discussion of vehicle circulation. So usually we have what's called a multimodal transportation analysis process or document that does get studied. And it can look for things like, needing to widen turn lanes or something like that in the vicinity. If there is no minimum parking standard, it won't discuss parking, but it would talk about any vehicle circulation effects in the area.
Okay, so traffic impacts are still going to be part of the conversation, even with this change?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I had one quick question about that. Are there going to be TDMs in place typically for these areas?
Yeah, we're actually developing a TDM ordinance now. And so the goal of that TDM ordinance is to standardize kind of TDM procedures. It can also set up a framework wherein specific transit-oriented areas can have higher expectations. So that's already the case, that we have higher expectations, but to have a kind of standard framework that with the citywide TDM ordinance, we're going to adopt that, and then we're going to come back through and update the area standards based on their transit capacity.
Okay, thank you. Do any of the members of the Commission have any more questions or comments? And if not, then we will request a motion. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Madam Chair, can I just clarify for the Commission, because this is a bit different than how we've done things before, but because we need to deal with certain conflicts of interest, we're going to be voting on whether or not we want to include each of these programs without the conflicted commissioners present, and that will be the final opportunity to vote on that item.
We have a motion by Commissioner Cranston and
I move to approve the changes in section 1 point, whichever subparagraph it is.
Program 1.2 subsection B.
1.2 subsection B.
And we have a second.
The second was Dempsey.
Vice Chair Dempsey.
Vice Chair.
All right.
And that passed
That counts.
5-0 with 2 recusal.
Would Commissioner Gutierrez please return? Can he hear us? All right, welcome back. Do any members of the commission have questions or comments regarding program 1.1 subsection F regarding emergency shelters as a by right use in areas to be identified, including the El Camino Real Precise Plan, and program 1.3 subsection H regarding increasing density in R2 zone sites? I see none. Would any member of the commission like to make a motion regarding whether to include program 1.1 subsection F and such?
So I'll move that we approve. I can't keep those numbers. Section 1.1 subsection F. Correct.
Program 1.1 subsection F and program 1.3 subsection H.
Yes.
And the motion is to include those 2 programs as drafted by staff.
Yes.
Thank you.
Correct.
Motion carries 6-0 with Commissioner Clark recused.
Now I believe Commissioner Clark may return and Vice Chair Dempsey skedaddles. Okay, now that Commissioner Clark is returned, do any members of the commission have any questions or comments regarding Program 1.1, subsection G, subsection B, regarding rezoning 1702 Miramonte, 777 Cuesta Drive, 1949 Grant Road, up to at least 30 dwelling units per acre, and Program 1.4, regarding affordable multifamily housing on religious and community assembly sites south of El Camino Real? Commissioner Nunes?
There we go. So a clarifying question, actually, because my question relates to 1.4, but I noticed that in the updated programs or exhibit that you handed out early, that staff handed out earlier, program 2.6 also lists a litany of programs here. So I'm just wondering, with regards to, how we just voted on program 1.3, are we still able to speak about 2.6?
If you have questions related to 2.6 that inform your vote on 1.4, that's fine. I would also recommend that we ask those questions again when Commissioner Dempsey comes back.
Okay.
Or, well, he can probably hear us, but, we can ask them again when Commissioner Dempsey comes back.
Okay. So my questions are related to 1.4. I just want to make sure I was clarifying that we weren't going to be precluded from 2.6 due to the recusals for any of the items that were listed under 2.6.
Well, you're not making a decision on 2.6 right now, but any question about 2.6 that informs 1.4 is fine.
Okay, that works for me. So I have some questions regarding the kind of if the goal is not met. It says here in the milestone and time frame section that if that target of 65 units isn't met, that the city will, quote, conduct further outreach to these sites and affordable housing developers to determine policies that would better encourage these projects and address government constraints. What kind of outreach and or encouragement would the city be able to conduct by that date of 2024, such that by 2031, those 65 units have been delivered?
So it would really be, we would adopt standards likely in the first round. So what would buildings look like and how big could they be and what density and things like that. And we're doing a prototype analysis for that. In the second round of outreach, if we still haven't gotten enough interest in building that affordable housing on those sites, then we will reach out to stakeholders, both the sites themselves and the developers, to see what's gotten in the way. So what's still holding you back? Have you had these conversations? Is there not enough money on the table? Is it, some standard that isn't working? Is it some process that isn't working? And we'll make corrections to those.
Okay, and so then so if I'm understanding correctly, December 31st, 2024, right now it sounds like the city staff is working on a set of criteria that will be implemented by 2020, that date, December 31st. So basically from essentially today to December 31st, 2024, we're going to remain in the status quo situation?
Yes, legislatively. Although as we're doing outreach, certainly people will be aware of these opportunities, and so there can be work on the private side.
Okay. And so then from 2024, we've adopted these new standards or policies and such. What is the next date by which, if things haven't moved forward, that second round of review kicks in?
I believe the current draft says by 2027. It's not as specific as the dates that we have in the item 2.6, but because they're fairly parallel, I think we could do them in parallel, and the dates do roughly line up.
Okay. And then, so on that date, 2027, we've determined that what got implemented in 2024 isn't working out. What's the thinking around how long it might take to do the new discovery of what those barriers are, identify possible solutions, and codify them and have them be implemented?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe in 2.6 we've given ourselves a year for that, so it would be the same.
Okay.
That would be the following year, 2028.
So by 2028? Yeah. Okay. And then in terms of possible blockers to that, I guess because this is already something that's been essentially, through the housing element committed to by the city, is it safe to say that, staff is to some extent shielded from any kind of council work prioritization, like rerouting away from saying, hey, it was 2027, we understand we have to get something done on this by 2028, and come what may, we have to do this? Is that fair to say that is?
Yeah, this would supersede other items in the council work plan.
Okay. And so then if all of this happens and then on at 2031, there hasn't been any interest and no units have been developed, what happens then?
If there are no units developed in 2031, it's very likely that we will be working on our 7th cycle housing element at that time. That could very well be an input into the 7th cycle housing element. And so that's going to be a whole different conversation with a whole different arena and a whole different set of analysis. It's certainly our target to do this, and we're going to do everything that we can to make it happen. And like I said, the best process for doing that is setting up the standards, doing a check on how well they're working, and continuing to do the outreach and the pushing on it over the whole 8 years.
Okay. And so then just last question here on that front. In terms of your or city staff's confidence level around an honest appraisal I'm hoping to get here on this, in terms of that full 65 units becoming a physical, real material thing that people are living in by 2031, or even some gradient of that, hey, maybe 30, 40 units, what have you. Just based on this kind of process of conducting outreach as the consequence for something not happening, to what extent does it seem, or does staff feel in terms of confidence that they can share with the commission, that these units will be real and with people living in them by 2031?
I think that we are going to do everything we can over the next 8 years to make it happen. There's always a challenge in implementing housing elements, that you need property owners to be willing partners, right? That's always a challenge with RENA sites and with development, and HCD recognizes that there are a lot of interest, a lot of people who are have their own agendas, and people who have their own desire to just keep going with their property and not do anything. That's always a variable in implementing any housing element. What we can do is we can control the rules and we can control the incentives, and that's what we're going to do to the fullest extent that we can.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Cranston?
Yes, a clarifying question. So the way I read it was there's actually 2 rounds of outreach. The first will be establishing the original plan in 2024, and then a checkpoint in 2027 to say, is it working?
Yep.
And then revisions to it. So there's in fact 2 rounds of review,
That's
not
right.
just one.
Yep.
Correct? Okay. That's what I just, that wasn't clear from that question. Thank you.
And I have just a very quick question. During that time, you'll be doing studies to look at what those may look like on the parcels, or do you wait for property owners to show interest before that happens?
So a prototype study would be like a block diagram. You know, it would not be like what the buildings would look like. It would just be blocks on a lot, you know. So that would be the extent of what we would do.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, then would like to ask if there is a motion on the floor. All right, Commissioner Cranston moves. And do we have a second? Commissioner Haymeyer.
I wrote down the numbers this time, so I move that item 1.1 G, B, and 1.4 be approved for inclusion in the housing.
Motion carries 6-0 with Vice Chair Dempsey recused.
Could we have Vice Chair Dempsey return, please? Thank you. And okay, now we'll discuss the balance of the housing element update, including general questions. Would any member of the commission like to make a motion regarding whether to recommend the council? Discussion first. Yes. Jumping the gun. Commissioner Cranston.
So a couple of items. So the term a prototype study was not well defined. Could you just give me that's in section 1.3. What does that mean? I have an idea of what it is, but I'd like to hear what the staff says.
Yeah, so basically we would take a range of different property sizes and characteristics that are representative of sites that we want to look at, and we would have you know, an architect that we would hire or an urban designer that we would hire go through and kind of build some hypothetical block models that comply with development standards. We would be looking for the development standards that act as significant constraints, that we would be looking for, you know, different, with their knowledge of what is, you know, basic kind of construction costs and, you know, just very simple tables of inputs like floor, you know, cost per construction for floor area and, you know, financing costs, you know, and things like that based on their knowledge of the economy. We would be doing this for, you know, probably a half dozen or so different sites and different densities, and depending on the variety of different parcels. For R3, which we can kind of build off of, we did dozens of prototype analyses. So we can build off of that. It's not starting from scratch. And it would largely look at kind of maximizing the allowed density, because that's kind of the fundamental goal, to make sure that the maximum densities under the general plan can be built. And really looking at what's in the way in terms of standards, what's in the way in terms of kind of the highest cost standards to comply with, and then making tweaks to those standards so that things work out both from a design perspective and feasibility perspective.
And then second question, I will admit that I was kind of disappointed by the feedback from the communities that are where English is not the primary language in the last review. And glad that we did the outreach on it. As I reviewed this, one of the things, there are points in the housing element that talk to some of this, but there's not a, I didn't, and my question is, did I miss something that talked more about it? The city of San Francisco was nice enough to send me an example this week of right now we send out yellow cards in the neighborhoods that, hey, there's going to be a street developed and it's in English. The one that they sent me for one across the street is in English, but actually has language that are specific to the document in addition in Spanish, Chinese, and Filipino. And so I was kind of looking for something that said more specifically that the city is going to do more, not just when people call in for translation services, but in the proactive outreach. And it wasn't clear to me, I didn't really see that explicitly. Did I miss that as I reviewed it? Being more proactive on all the communications to reach or what staff called it, the people where English isn't the first language, or is it only on those programs?
So a couple of things that we did. We certainly met with those groups on numerous occasions. We've also been more proactive about providing translated materials. Both tonight's staff report we were able to translate into Spanish, as well as the main 4 chapters of the housing element we were able to translate and post online. We have, the online materials are translated. Our notices do include, just a very brief, with interest in this, contact, our multilingual team in Chinese and Spanish. So there's kind of 2 levels of what's going on, right? There's what we did in order to inform the housing element. And so I think we have a lot of detail in our outreach sections where we added that information about what we did to inform the housing element. I think there's a larger question that I think you're bringing up, which is how are we improving our city processes so future planning efforts are more inclusive? And that's an ongoing process where we're getting better every day and providing more more services and more opportunities every day. I think that this housing element has been a great learning opportunity for us to build some of that expertise, and it's something that we're going to be continuing on, and making sure that, for example, a big part of the outreach is education, making sure that things are clearly stated, acronyms and things like that, making sure that people understand what the why and what the obligations are of the city, and how they can best provide input, and a lot of those basics as well. So a lot of lesson learned in the process, and we're definitely committed to continuing that as we do more long-range projects.
Commissioner Clark?
I had just a general question that came up recently. I know that it was touched on briefly at the end of the presentation, but I think HCD there's some verbiage where they're now recommending that a jurisdiction do a formal adoption only after they've received a draft or an HCD finding from that it generally meets the statutory requirements. I assume in our case, we've talked to them several times. We're planning to talk to them again, it sounds like, between now and the council hearing, and that would actually be the formal adoption, and there's no harm in adopting it per se at the council level, and if for some reason it weren't certified, we would just go back through the process. But I just wanted to ask if there's any if your understanding is that, it sounds like it's just a recommendation from them rather than thou shalt not adopt.
Yeah, I mean, it is a recommendation. Certainly cities can, will do what they will do. I will say with a lot of sympathy to HCD right now, they are drinking from a fire hose of, housing elements at, we'll say, various levels of consistency with state law. A lot of people really rushed, even without submitting drafts to HCD, to adopt and then get HCD's input after the fact. And I think that language is really, that it is new language on the website. It was just put in the last couple of weeks. And it reads to me that it's referencing those situations, that people shouldn't feel that they are, not subject to the ramifications of not having an adopted housing element just because you adopted one, right? I think that is a valid cautionary statement for every city, right? And I think we would agree with that. That being said, we have talked directly to our HCD reviewers on a number of occasions. We've laid out our approval timeline to them. They've acknowledged and, provided, implicit support for that timeline. They are willing to work with us, as we said, between now and April 11th to make sure that the best thing, what we can submit to council is the best that can be. And so we're feeling confident about this schedule. So that's where we're at. I think, we've been working, with them on 2 or 3 drafts now, and I don't think we're quite the audience of that language online.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Vice Chair Dempsey, I believe you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have 3 questions here for staff. First, related to item 1.8, the park fees. Walk me through what the practical effect of reducing those park fees might be. I don't know how we use that money. I don't know if it's going to mean smaller parks we purchase in the future. I don't know if it means less maintenance. I don't know what it means. Walk me through what the practical impact of reducing park fees will be for the residents of Mountain View.
Yeah, I'll say that it's that very question that made it kind of hard to craft a program addressing this. We wanted to provide certainty to the community and to developers, but at the same time, there's so many different variations of how compliance with the parkland standards can happen. It's very hard to predict what the practical effect might be. We also have a lot of opportunity for creativity in creating opportunities for developers and property owners to provide publicly accessible open space at low monetary cost to them and low impact to them on their development pro forma. And we want to take advantage of those opportunities as best we can. I think that's going to be a big focus of our analysis. What are the types of open space that can be provided on site and really provide those benefits to the broader community without negatively impacting developers? That being said, on average, 20% reduction in monetary fees could end up being a reduction in the amount of funds we have available to do, say, like we just did the overhaul of the community center. I believe that was using parkland funds. We do have an active open space acquisition program, and we do buy properties. I believe, like the Wyandotte Park was probably purchased using parkland dedication funds. So there would be a reduction in those funds available. I will say it's only a reduction in those funds available relative to the number of units built. We are expecting a lot of housing to be built, and that means that there is going to be a lot of money available, right? It's the ratio that goes down. It's not the amount of parkland that goes down. The amount of parkland will definitely increase. So there's a lot that we can also work on to find other sources of funding. So we're looking at what other land uses we might be able to levy fees on. That could backfill the 20%. Other potential grants or, measures, voting measures could backfill the 20%. So we may not end up losing the ratio at all. So there's a lot of analysis to be done, and we're optimistic that we can maintain the high standard that this community has for its open spaces, for sure.
Thank you, Eric. Two more things. There was a letter that came in from the public, I believe it was from the Housing Action Coalition. It was quite long, from their attorneys, that critiqued some of the ways that we had classified properties on the list. Give me reassurance. Help me understand sort of how you view that and why you're confident those the way that we've classified those properties is going to stand up when we go to HCD.
Yeah, I think Stephanie or Bev is on the line. I'm going to let them start this one.
Sure. Hi, I'll start, and Bev wants to. Oh, sorry. Can you all hear me fine?
Yeah, you're coming in. Thanks.
Okay. If Bev wants to jump in, please feel free. So we did review the letter that discussed specific sites, and we are looking into the issues that were raised in that letter. I think there's sort of a few things to keep in mind. One is we have been talking to HCD about our methodology for evaluating the non-vacant sites. And they have sort of described a methodology that involves looking at trends that suggest that sites will redevelop and connecting the sites that are in the inventory to what we've seen through those trends. So that's a portion of the analysis that we provided in the revised document. They also have suggested that we look at specifics about certain sites that don't necessarily fall in line with those trends and provide information about why we think those sites are likely to redevelop despite the fact that they don't necessarily fall in line with those market trends. And so we've added some analysis related to that as well. And they're looking for us to connect the programs to the likelihood that some of these sites will redevelop. And so we've gone through that exercise in the most recent draft. We have provided that language to HCD and asked them to review it and give us their take on whether or not the way that we have revised that section provides what they are looking for, and have gotten confirmation from them that it is. That said, we do want to continue to be mindful that as new information arises, that we want to be thinking about what that information is telling us, and consider its merits and whether or not it's something that we should be looking at. I know that Bev can talk a little bit more about the specifics on the buffer that we have in place, and maybe I'll turn it over to you to talk about some of those impacts if we were to need to rely more on the buffer. But happy to help answer any other questions if needed.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Great. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Stephanie. I wanted to echo what Stephanie said in that staff has been very diligent in our conversations with HCD all along. They are very familiar with the city's inventory. And so we had worked numerous times specifically on the non-vacant sites analysis and identifying the very unique characteristics that are present within each site. Each site is going to have their own story. And so the way that we had crafted that section did try to highlight kind of the nuances with what's going on with the sites. And so that echoes what Ellen had presented within her presentation and what Stephanie just mentioned regarding kind of the three kind of main topics that HCD is looking for, that the non-vacant sites at least kind of fulfill
various criteria within those main categories. And so there is a buffer that Mountain View has within the inventory. Our goal is to try to maintain a buffer so that we don't run into the no net loss provisions. We continue to welcome feedback, and we'll continue to work through these details with HCD as we sort of get to the finish line.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie and Bev. I do also want to add that we did chat with them today, and I think there are a couple of things that came out of that conversation. One is that they are taking an approach of really trying to get cities to re-examine and explain their sites, right? Which is something that we can do. That's kind of the non-substantive change that we can continue to make as we go through to council and then through the certification process. And then I think the other outcome that came out of it is that it's an ongoing conversation, and we really would want to get them on board with supporting our housing element. And so I'm sure we'll continue to have conversations with them about our sites, as well as other changes to the housing element that can support, that can be get their support. So that I do want to reiterate, I know after the last few reviews, it may feel a little hollow to say that, we have HCD, review of our draft language, and that they've, provided feedback and positive feedback on our draft so far, and that we'll continue to refine the draft with them. That being said, we do have a really good relationship with them. They know our sites, they know our analysis, and we're really narrowing down to a smaller and smaller set of potential kind of points of concern. So still feel optimistic. Thanks for asking. And there's still a lot of work to be done for sure, but that's where we're at.
Great answer, thank you. So the last question I had, you've sort of already half answered this, but maybe it just bears reinforcing and maybe add a little bit of detail. And it has to do with the consequences of noncompliance. I think you mentioned a minute ago, or I guess it was a while ago, it was more than a minute, that there are both builder's remedies that's one of the things that happen, and the loss of access to affordable housing funding and transportation funding is the other. If you can add a little bit more detail to that, either by telling us, precisely how many builder's remedy applications have we gotten or do we expect, I think that's really important to know. You said there was 1 million that we already know about, and there's an April funding round that could potentially cost us more. So if there's any additional detail you can give us on what the consequences of noncompliance are, I think that's something worth everybody hearing twice, if not once.
Sure. So overview of builder's remedy. It's actually a fairly old law. It says if you don't have a compliant housing element, then you cannot enforce your zoning or general plan standards. So that means that anybody can come in at any density they want in practically any location that they want. And so the reason it's never really come up before is because it only came into play when you wanted your entitlement approval, and it's very hard to time that against when somebody doesn't have a compliant housing element. Now, because they adopted SB 330, which says that you can submit a preliminary application which vests all the rules in place when you submit your application. Now, if you don't have your housing element in place, somebody can submit a SB 330 preliminary application, and they are locked in on those rules or lack thereof. So at this point, we have 3 submitted applications where they are, they've claimed, that they are kind of looking to not comply with certain density or development standards. There are, we're not aware of anybody else waiting in the wings. These 3 we kind of knew they were interested in coming in even before January 31st. And so it's possible that a longer delay could give time for people who weren't otherwise planning to do so to prepare an application. It's not something that you can do overnight, right? An SB 330 preliminary application it's a lot easier than a standard, formal planning application, but it's not nothing. There's still a lot of research and design and documentation that you have to do. So certainly if this goes beyond April 11th, we might be expecting more. It'd be reasonable to expect more. There is, of course, a catch for developers. They do have to provide either 100% moderate income units or 20% lower income units. And this is actually more than our standard BMR requirement. So there is probably some cost benefit that a developer has to do about, well, if we're opening up gatekeepers, then maybe that's my opportunity to, not be subject to development standards or density. And then, but to not have to do the 20% BMR. The other consequences, I'm going to have to defer to Ellen on the funding consequences. Thanks.
So your question was on the funding opportunities that we'd lose out on. So the one that I highlighted, the $1 million, is for the pro-housing incentive program. That only recently came aboard, so the timing of that is still a little uncertain. The PIP requires a pro-housing designation, and so we would need the designation by March. However, they are not issuing awards until May. So it's likely that, if a lot of cities don't have the pro-housing designation, therefore not qualifying for PIP, they will have those funds available. So the one that was presented on my slide, that's for PIP. There are additional funds like the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Grant. Right now, that deadline is August 2023. That is possibly up to $15 million for Lot 12 if they decide to apply for that. But Lot 12 developers could also use other funding sources, so it's available to them. And so then we have other ones coming up in September and December. That includes Local Housing Trust Fund, PDA Planning Grant, Infill Infrastructure Grant, and then what is called the OBAG grant. That one's a big one. That's transportation. It's about $8 million right now. That doesn't kick into place until December, but it's hard to say if we postpone it now, we do another draft, what that would mean later down the line. And that project, those funds go towards several improvement projects for streets, like the Escuela, Moffett Boulevard street improvements.
And all of those would be dependent on a compliant housing element and a pro-housing designation?
The ones that I listed afterwards aren't tied to the pro-housing designation.
But they are tied to the housing element being compliant. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
No more questions?
I'll just add one other consequence is it's a lot of work working on the housing element, and it does delay us being able to work on other council priorities like R3 and downtown and things like that. So, we really want to get started on I keep saying this, I'm getting sick of myself saying it, but we want to quit planning to plan and start actually planning. So that's another big consequence.
Commissioner Haymeyer, you're next. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Gutierrez. I'm sorry, I can't clear the list, so.
Thank you. So I have a few questions. So just to follow up on Commissioner Cranston's question, I was unsure about the response. Are you saying that moving forward, we'll be able to send out notices to our community members in all different languages or not?
It's certainly within the possibility, it's technologically possible. These are kind of procedures that we need to set up as a city so that they're standardized across different projects. And there's a lot of work that I know the city manager's office is working on to standardize those different procedures for different projects, and when notices have a certain level of detail in different languages.
Okay, so it's a work in progress, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'd rather hear that than, I don't know, something else. And then in terms of the letter from Farella, in your discussions with HCD, have there been instances where they have also identified the same concerns that Farella has? And if they have, in the end, once these have been addressed in our conversations with them, if Farella is still upset with the way it's been approached or not resolved according to their liking, what is the end goal? Would they be able to then contest the findings to the state of California and challenge our element plan? Or, I mean, it's a big question, but what's the end point here from that vantage point, from their perspective?
I think right now they are acting in good faith to try to inform us of how we can make our housing element better. They also will not be shy about writing a letter to HCD if they come to different conclusions than we do about the suitability of our sites. From there, HCD, would kind of talk to us, ask us to further refine. And they've done this before, right? This isn't the first letter that we've received from them. And HCD reached back out to us after they got that letter and said, hey, here are some points. Maybe you can provide a little bit more detail around these sites and these points. And so I expect that's how the conversation is going to go with HCD. After that, I would have to defer to City Attorney Lee about whether there's some formal action that they could take against the city if they disagree with HCD's certification.
I think the most likely outcome, because it actually doesn't have a cost to it, is that anyone who wishes to challenge the housing element would be going to HCD, as many advocacy groups have done, both in our city and in other cities. So I expect that is probably where the intention will be. Great,
thank you. Thank you for the feedback and the perspective on what the end game is on that front, because I think for all of us in general, the more information we have on that, the better we can understand what the crux of the issues are and how we can then deal with that as they come. So thank you so much for that. And then my final question is, when we look at 1.8, there's a section here about doing a nexus study. And my simple question is, and if it's in the plan, and I must have missed it, but is there a timeline for that? How soon would we do that type of nexus study?
Yeah, the nexus study has a deadline in the program, which is December 31st, 2025. It doesn't say nexus study. I'm sorry, that I should have. We should have added that in explicitly saying, but you need the nexus study to adopt fees. So that's the connection there. You can't adopt fees without the nexus study.
Thank you. So a follow-up question to that then is, would we be able to add on that language tonight for clarification's sake, or how would you suggest we approach with this?
We can take that into advisement. I would say it's a non-substantive change that we can do, administratively.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Haymeyer.
Thank you. I just wanted to build off of the conversation about the Housing Action Coalition letter. So as they're helping to refine the site inventory, can we talk a little bit about the 3 builders remedy applications that are in process or under consideration? If our inventory changes and these 3 are proceeding, do we get to include the units that are from the builder's remedy in the 6 cycle elements, housing element? That is not a perfectly worded question,
No,
but I can see that you're nodding.
exactly what
So,
you're
like,
saying, yeah.
I want to make sure we can get credit if things are proceeding.
Honestly,
and
that
our inventory changes.
Yeah, so it's definitely on our minds, and we want to verify with HCD before we move forward on that. It's certainly a great opportunity. There is a lot of affordable housing that's proposed in those 3 projects, but yeah, it's just something that we want to double check with HCD before giving a final answer.
+1. I'd love to double check that. Thank you.
Commissioner Cranston, you had another question?
Yeah, I guess a follow-up question. First, a follow-up to Commissioner Clark's question. So it was from that same item on the website. I read that we will not have a certified housing element until HCD says we'll have a certified housing element. And so even if council adopts on in April, it wouldn't be until, I think you said, June when they're required to respond that we would, if they said yes, we would not have a certified housing element until they say yes, correct?
It wouldn't be certified by HCD until it's certified by them. But the important date is when the city adopts a substantially compliant housing element, one that is substantially compliant with state law. So if the council adopts it on April 11th and a month later HCD certifies it as substantially compliant, well, the adoption occurred on April 11th.
So that was one question. And the other one is, as we've been kind of talking about this, it's kind of a question for you, city attorney. I like a lot of what I see in Exhibit E. In the language of the resolution, it says that we adopted, the housing element was put out there last week, but it doesn't really say that plus everything that's been included in Exhibit E. Is the language in the resolution need to say that items in Exhibit E are part of what we would be approving? Because it's not clear to me that the stuff in Exhibit E is covered in the resolution as it was circulated. You can go off and look at that if you want, but this is important to me, and I want to make sure that Exhibit E is part of what we're approving when we approve it.
I'll double check that, but I do recall that we had language in the resolution that expressly referred to an Exhibit E with modifications to the last posted housing element. And perhaps Ms. Yap.
Oh, I'm sorry. It is there. It's on the bottom of page 4. It says, further resolve, City of Mountain View 2015-2022 housing element is hereby repealed, blah, 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 blah. And then City of Mountain View 6-cycle housing element, as more specifically shown in Exhibit D, together with modifications shown in Exhibit E, both attached here to and incorporated herein by reference, is hereby adopted and incorporated into the general plan.
Okay, so the fact that there's no approval date, because I thought there were requirements and had to notice that that housing element was out there, that there was no approval date that lined up with that. That's not an issue. That was my...
Are you looking at the resolution now? Is there a page or paragraph that
it was that I read that
about?
section, and I guess my understanding was HCD says you have to have notified the community about the housing element before you approve it. And since Exhibit E is kind of a moving target, at what point is the community notified of what Exhibit E is to be compliant with that? And it wasn't clear to me that we were meeting that criteria when I read that. That was my specific question. I know it saw the reference, but it was like, have we actually told people this is what's part of it? I mean, if it's moving, that was something to think about.
Yeah, it's certainly we're going to comply with the timeline for the final document before adoption on April 11th with any changes. Certainly the council themselves could make changes, right, on the dais. That could very well happen. The availability date that I'm aware of is before you submit it to HCD for their review. So they want to make sure that the public has adequate time to review the document before they accept comments from the public about the document.
That's correct. The availability date is before it's submitted to HCD. So it will be made available, prior to the council meeting. It'll be posted with the agenda and the rest of the agenda packet, and it will be available after council action.
I believe, Vice Chair Dempsey, did you have your?
Yeah, I had one more question that just occurred to me. I don't think this even shows up in the housing element, but I was hoping you could expound just a little bit on SB 10. I'll tell you why I ask. In talking to community groups, that had been raised as one of many tools that the city has to increase density and increase housing. It's not something that I know a lot about, and I thought it would be helpful if you could tell us a little bit about what it is, how it works, and sort of how the city views it in terms of its pros and cons as a tool to increase housing production.
Yeah, so simply SB 10 allows cities to rezone properties to allow 10 units on those properties, and you don't have to do any CEQA on that rezoning action. So it's a streamlining measure. It doesn't mandate that the city do anything. It's a streamlining tool so that cities can more quickly and efficiently and with less legal risk adopt these upzonings. Now, as I think there was a lot of discussion with stakeholders about how or whether to include reference to SB 10 in the housing element. Our concern is really not about using SB 10 per se, and more about having that drive the policy, right? If there's something that the city wants to adopt and it doesn't match SB 10 exactly, then we shouldn't use SB 10 if it's not something that we want to adopt. So let's have the policy drive what we're actually adopting rather than the streamlining. If we decide that 10 units per parcel is the best way to do it and those standards that are associated with it work for the city, then let's use it by all means.
Commissioner Gutierrez, are you wanting to ask another question?
I don't think that's updated. I'll go ahead and withdraw the request.
Okay, sure. And Commissioner Nunez?
So I guess at a very high level, I'm just curious to understand in terms of like risk here for city staff in your guys' understanding of and kind of like the vantage point you have around where the housing element is today, our draft, in parallel with HCD guidelines and what you've seen from other cities, what's going on with them. If our next submission of our housing element draft to HCD were to be rejected by them and we were to become non-compliant, what, in your understanding, would have been the likeliest reason for that rejection?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the only reason would be the site's inventory, right? And details of individual sites not meeting the non-vacant site analysis requirements. There really hasn't been any other issue that's come up. AFFH, I think, has been a big concern by the community and by the state. And, in the last couple of months, we've done quite a bit to shore up our AFFH kind of programs. And so I think, you know, we've really crossed all the other T's and dotted all the other I's. Our other comments from HCD are fairly minimal. We're not receiving any other comments from the public other than about the sites inventory. You know, certainly we're still getting comments about desired programs, and that can be discussion with the EPC tonight. But I think it's pretty clear that we've moved a long way in terms of addressing concerns that have been voiced by the community about, you know, the issues like AFFH and school equity and things like that. So that's if there's anything, that's the weakness. But again, you know, we have a long way to go in terms of conversations with HCD. We have more detail that we can provide, and more. We also have confidence in our previous discussions with HCD.
Okay. And so following along that response, you noted the AFFH concerns and the work that has been done to address those. So in the updated exhibit handout, under in that blue text, in that third bullet point under objectives and metrics, it says that in addition to the 65 units from program 1.4, 120 units from the R1 update expected to take place in the south of El Camino. This one right here, objectives and metrics 2.6. And then I think it also mentions, there's a few questions I'll have about this one. It mentions there that the city, and I guess this is through program 1.7, I'm looking for some clarification here. The city will develop and adopt incentives and zoning to facilitate property owners south of El Camino, other than churches, yada yada. What is that and incentives / zoning? What is that? What are the details of that?
Let me turn on my mic. At this point, it's you know, we have to figure it out, right? Part of it, you know, one thing that I think about is a tool that we put into the East Wisman Precise Plan, which is kind of this little carrot that we have for the big office properties out there that have these big empty parking lots, where if you give land to an affordable housing developer from your big empty parking lot, you get access to bonus FAR that other people don't have access to. So that it's incentives like that, and you can be creative with incentives like that for sites that have large underutilized parking lots. Or maybe there are incentives that we can provide for the small R2 sites that we're looking to upzone, so that they're not deciding to max out their density under our BMR inclusionary requirement. They're deciding to provide BMR inclusionary units instead. So there are a lot of tools in the toolbox. Obviously, we also have to come up with development standards for these things, and we have to study it and we have to look at it. And there are probably a lot of good ideas out there, but that's what we're looking at.
And those kinds of incentives and kind of zoning changes, that same bullet point goes on to say that it would target the development in expectation of at least 100 additional affordable units. Are those changes that you mentioned, that there's a plethora, it seems, of possible approaches we could take, is that where those 100 affordable units are?
Yes,
yeah?
yes,
okay.
Exactly.
And so then, I guess you mentioned one very specific one, right, with regards to like the East Wisman and such. And given that I just heard you mention that, many of the AFFH concerns have been ameliorated in part as part of this draft. And then given that this is the affirmatively the AFFH goal 2.6, the item, right? And then also hearing you saying right now that there's still a lot of work to do. I'm just hoping to get some clarification on what is right, like what's going on there.
I'm sorry, can you
Yeah,
be more
so I
specific
just
with your
heard you
question?
say that there is still a lot of work to do with regards to those kind of like incentives and zoning, right? And then in the previous response, I heard you mention that a lot of the AFFH concerns have kind of been ameliorated as part of this draft. And so given that this is the AFFH goal, and it seems like there's still a grab bag of potential like rules and regulations, my concern is that it does not seem like there is a specific prescribed set of like solutions that we're going to actually take. It says incentives and zoning. What are those?
Yeah, so what HCD likes to see is a target, right? An outcome. That's what they really like to see. They know that you can't do all the detailed planning work when you're trying to solve all of these legislative issues and solve all of these analytical issues on a citywide level that you have to with the housing element. So they do understand that there's going to be a lot of questions left unanswered, but we have a floor here, right? And that floor is the 100 units. That floor is going to guide us on future decisions that we have to make about what that zoning is and what those incentives are. And that's really what HCD is looking for.
Okay. And so then if all of those in 2.6 with regards to south of El Camino were to actually become real like inhabited units, the religious sites is 65, the R1, R2 would be about 120, and the additional zoning and incentives would net at least 100. So if everything were to go minimally, maximally well, we would be looking at 285 units south of El Camino. I was looking everywhere else I could on the like inventory. Is it safe to say that right now and if not, I actually would love to know the number, that our total for the amount of new units in the south of El Camino is coming to a grand total of 285, possibly?
So there are other programs, and that part of the role of that program 2.6 is to really compile all of those programs that we have that are addressing areas, putting affordable housing in areas of highest opportunity, highest access, highest education, and so on. So we also have a program where we have a new kind of mini no net loss, where we will track the sites south of El Camino and around downtown and ensure that we always maintain lower income capacity in those sites, right? So if a site gets redeveloped without lower income units, then we're going to have to go out and rezone and find another site for that lower income capacity south of El Camino and around downtown. We have our downtown affordable housing target of 65 units. We also are, we are also committing to facilitating all of the affordable housing projects that are in the pipeline, many of which go to the highest performing and most exclusive schools in Mountain View. So there are certainly a lot of, and we're going to continue to incentivize the development of SB 9 units and ADUs. We have a pilot program for deed restricting ADUs using BMR funds to help support their construction and deed restriction. So that's a potential source of affordable units. And then also the upzoning of R2, like I said, along with those incentives. So altogether, who knows how many units, but it's not a small number of programs, and we're really trying to fire on all cannons, as it were, to try to get these units into place.
Right, and that's my concern, because this not small number of programs, from what I'm reading from 2.6, if everything goes perfectly and we get 285 affordable units, thank you for the clarification, that would be, in the best case scenario, 2.56% of our RENA. And so that's my concern when so much of the economic opportunity is, in terms of like residents, is in the south of El Camino as well. To have 2.56% of our possible RENA be affordable units in the south of El Camino, I'm finding that a little bit, I'm trying to reconcile that.
Commissioner Cranston.
A question for the chair. We've been asking questions. Are we in discussion as well, or?
We are.
Okay. Okay. I don't know if we were doing both or they're two separate things. Well, it wasn't clear.
Well, questions first, and then
Okay.
we'll go through discussion after that.
Then I'm done with my questions.
I think most of my questions were covered, so I'm going to just slide right into discussion. Commissioner Cranston.
Okay. So I guess overall, I'd say I think I'm very pleased with the progress that was done here. I think a lot of the questions that I had have been answered, or comments that I've made have been folded their way in through this in one way or the other. There's only one thing that I saw as I felt like was a change that was beyond what we talked about. One of the things you've done a very good job is putting specific dates on things and providing specific milestones. What I was struck by was the TREO action item. TREO is a critical component of our management of transition in the community. And the way the action items are worded, we will continuously look at this. In my experience, is that any action item that is we will continuously look at it means that we never actually look at it. And so I would prefer that there was something in here in that 3.2 that says, we will do a formal review of the TREO, the effectiveness of that in some date, okay? But the continuous thing, to me, says it never actually happens. And everything else, we have a date. It's very specific. That was one of the very, very few that didn't actually have, we're going to actually look at it at a specific time. At this point, I'm open to staff saying when that should be. I don't know when the TREO program was originally put in place. It seemed like if it was been around for like 5 years, whatever 5 years from that was, we should look at it at that point. But I'd rather see, that would be a change that I would request from the high level. We're going to continuously look at it to, we're going to do a specific review at this point in time. I don't know what other commissioners think, but it's too important to not specifically be looked at, in my opinion.
Commissioner Gutierrez.
Commissioner Cranston, so what you're asking for then is a specific date to be included in our plan tonight. And if that's what I understood, what date proposition would you have us entertain?
I guess Yes, I'm not sure if we have housing people on the line that know when it was done. It was, the way the language is worded right now, it says, continuously monitor conditions to identify needs for updates to TREO, including potential necessary increases in assistance. It's the third bullet under milestones and framework. If, I don't know when TREO was proposed or when it was put in place. Maybe Commissioner Nunez knows. But if it was approved in 2024 or 2014, then it should be looked 5 years later. I mean, I don't know when it was done. If it hasn't been done in a while, then I'll give you, say 2025. So since I didn't have the background behind it, Commissioner Gutierrez, wasn't quite ready to put in a date, but it just felt like it shouldn't be more than halfway through. It definitely shouldn't be out as far as 2027. It should be sometime before that, but I was open to staff feedback on when that would be.
Well, I know Mr. Chen is on the line, Assistant Director. He might be able to provide some insight on plans to monitor the TREO, as well as any potential dates of updating. I think he's on the line.
Yes. Hi. Hi. Thanks, Eric, and thanks for the question. So the city adopted the Tenant Relocation Assistance Ordinance back in 2010, and the city actually took action to make a relatively recent update to the TREO a couple of years ago now. We are including additional evaluation of the TREO as part of our displacement response strategy for specific parts of the ordinance. But I think to Commissioner Cranston's question, we could fold in an overall programmatic review. And I think the timeframe, say by December of 2024, would be feasible. So I think you were saying 2025, Commissioner Cranston. So I think if we did a December 2024, that would align with our displacement response strategy. So I think that's a date that we could include.
Thank you.
I have a quick question for staff. Is that something that is a non-substantive edit that you can do, or should we put that in as far as the final motion?
I think for that one, that it could be part of the final motion. That's fine.
Thanks. Any other items for discussion? Yes, Commissioner Clark.
No, I was just going to say overall, I'm very happy with how this has progressed, and have been encouraged with the support letters that we've received recently, especially with what's been added to Exhibit E. Excuse me. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Gutierrez?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a quick question, and bear with me here. Are we discussing all points now of the housing development plan, including 3.2, or are we going section by section, or what's the?
All points that were not already voted upon with the recusals. So general discussion outside of those.
Awesome. So then I can bring up questions if I have about 3.2.
Yes.
Okay, great. So if having said that, and with that clarification, thank you so much. I have a quick question and actually a suggestion, and I'm hoping that we have some consensus around this one because we worked so well so far up to this point, so it'd be great to continue that tradition. So as I look at 3.2 under objections and metrics, the first bullet point says acquire, preserve at least 50 housing units that would remain affordable, e.g. around 30% of household income. I'd like a little bit more specificity and if possible, an increased number. So I was thinking about looking at this from a different perspective because as it's currently reading, this would basically mean 6 per year. And I think the city of Mountain View so far, it's demonstrated that throughout this process that's iterative, we can improve on what we have as a proposed plan. So I was looking more at the number from 50 to 100 and be specific with having 50 for 2 bedrooms specifically and 50 for 3 bedrooms so that we're clear with our language of intent of what the goals are in order for us to meet this type of objective. And I'm wondering if I have consensus or buy-in on that type of wording and language to include in this updated version of what we're reviewing now. And I'd appreciate your help on that.
Would you do me a favor and just repeat which program
Sure.
and which metric?
Of course, Madam Chair. So we're looking at 3.2, displacement prevention and mitigation. And this is within the revised Exhibit 1-Exhibit E. So when I look at that, then I'm looking at 3.2, displacement prevention and mitigation. And once you're there, underneath in bold, it says objectives and metrics. It's the first bullet point.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, sorry, Commissioner Cranston.
So this is the one on, you're talking about the one on acquiring the property, so you want to increase the number that the city would be acquiring?
That's my understanding in terms of how this reads, but if I'm misinterpreting that, I'm sure our city attorney or Eric will chime in and provide clarification.
I think I would have to defer that to the Assistant Community Development Director.
I'm happy to provide some additional clarification on this. This would be a goal for any entity, whether that would be, for example, a community land trust that gets set up to undertake acquisition preservation work, or perhaps with nonprofit developers who might acquire or preserve at least 15 housing units. Where the city would come in is to attempt to develop funding partnerships of at least $10 million to facilitate an external entity to do the actual acquisition or preservation. So it wouldn't be the city undertaking it, but it would be our goal to set up a program and then try to get the funding sources to be able to facilitate the financial feasibility of those 50 housing units.
Commissioner Clark, did you?
Yeah, just on this, I appreciate the sentiment of wanting to do more, and if I'm channeling former Councilmember McAllister, he would be thrilled because this is one of his things that he repeatedly has wanted us to do, which is acquire and preserve housing. I think where staff is probably coming in around the 50 mark is this is not going to be acquire a unit here, acquire a unit there, a 2-bedroom here, a 1-bedroom, where we really have the ability to control what we're acquiring. It's really probably going to come in the form of acquiring a one or more existing apartment buildings that have multiple units in them, and we wouldn't really be sure what the layout would be, and then probably fixing that up to the point where it can be preserved longer term. So. I think it would be, and I think probably where the 50 number came was a lot of those existing units or complexes that are out there. I think it would be hard to, you'd have to assemble a number of them, I think, to get into the hundreds. Not to say it couldn't be done, but I'm guessing that sort of where the 50 mark came in is that they're really looking at the housing stock that exists that's probably at the age where it's naturally affordable and at risk of being redeveloped, and then kind of going from there. So that would be my only hesitation with doing something that's more like double that.
Commissioner Nunes.
Yeah, so a couple things. I appreciate that our discussion on item 3.2 of displacement, especially regarding the trail, appreciate it. That Commissioner Cranston opened us up on this item. I know I'm definitely supportive of the December 2024 kind of TREO review advanced state. That sounds like a very easy thing to slot into the anti-displacement program. And so with regards to this acquisition and preservation target, personally, I think that it's definitely a very worthwhile addition to this. I think there's ways to potentially shift this that could be a little bit more empowering of the community, and also have the end result of actually, having the people who need it, whether, living in units that are affordable to them, not necessarily because the city acquired them, but because the city facilitated the ability for those to be preserved. And so when I'm looking at, I think, the third highlighted bullet point, where it says create a community ownership plan for a community ownership model structure, to me, that sounds pretty close to a COPA/TOPA style program. And so I guess I'm just kind of, before I keep going, clarifying question, like, is that the intent of that bullet point? To set the table for such a program like that?
Yeah, that it is the intent. COPA/TOPA is, I think, usually referring to a legal structure where it's offered to a community ownership organization. And then people talk about CLTs or community land trusts as a form of that community ownership. So it's a broad term for all of that.
Okay. And then with regards to that acquisition and preservation piece, one of the things, I actually really also agree with Commissioner Gutierrez that 50 units is pretty low. I think there's a sense of urgency around bedroom size because as we've seen several projects like that project over on San Antonio where developers really want to sub-optimize for the kinds of bedroom mixes that are actually in demand by our families that really need them, essentially. Studios and one bedrooms are not going to cut it for our families. And we're seeing now, this like Prometheus project out there trying to cram all of these BMR units into one building. The Google East Middlefield project that we saw a few months ago also, provided some alternative mitigation around like giving us the land so that we could, as the city, develop all of the affordable units on one site. So the point I'm trying to get at is that I think that looking at a target of saying that the way I would modify this and kind of along the lines of Commissioner Gutierrez's thinking, which I super support, I actually would like to say that, I would take that first highlighted point and actually just shift it into that community ownership action plan because there's a lot more flexibility that tenants have with a COPA/TOPA style initiative. And the city can pull on a lot more partners, and the tenants can also potentially pull on partners themselves, right, as a tenants union. Personally, I would like to see a language that says something to the effect of, through this community ownership program, the city will enable sufficient resources or facilitate sufficient partnerships to respective tenant unions or community developers, such that a minimum of 103 and or 2 bedroom units are preserved through the duration of the housing element. And that way, Councilmember John McAllister can know that the city themselves have not acquired these units as well, and so he can keep banging his shoe on the table for us.
Vice Chair Dempsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is going to be somewhat an unfair question to staff, but I'll ask it anyway. Could you give us a rough back of the envelope calculation of what it would cost to acquire 50 housing units? And you can make them studio apartments if you want to, but like what's the price tag for the city to acquire 50 units?
Yeah, I'm sure the Assistant Community Development Director can probably respond to that. I hope.
Sorry in
Thanks
advance.
No worries. Thanks for the question. That's a great question. I would say a couple of things. The 50 housing units was also developed in response to some community feedback that we received, and having at least that floor. And of course, the city would be looking to do hopefully more than that. But we have a displacement response strategy that we are setting up, and we are taking an item to council to talk about this plus other displacement response efforts. And just to echo Commissioner Clark's comment, the acquisition preservation program that we've been discussing with the community through our recent outreach program, having stakeholder meetings, is that the focus would be more on the, it would be a focus on naturally affordable housing units, primarily covered under the city's rent stabilization program. And under that program, primarily the units will be in 10-unit buildings all the way up to, say, 100-unit buildings or more. There's a wide range, but on average, the buildings are, say, 20 to 30 units per building. And so an acquisition preservation program would seek to be opportunistic in terms of if a landlord or a property owner actually wants to sell the building. And then typically in these older buildings, the units are smaller. They are studios, ones and twos, and they may not have 3-bedroom units. And so there is a composition in terms of the older housing stock. And then there's the part where it's about being able to facilitate an acquisition if a building does come up for sale. We have done some analysis in terms of the cost of an acquisition of these older buildings. And typically in these older buildings, there would be some rehabilitation work that would be desired to bring things up to more recent codes or other sort of amenities or other improvements that would be done. And so in some of the sampling and modeling that we've been able to do, these are not cheap. An average acquisition cost of some sample projects would be $400,000 a door, with rehabilitation costs between $50,000 to $100,000, of course, depending on the age of the building and the condition of the building. So there is a relatively high cost, and typically acquisition preservation projects do not have access to traditional funding sources, at least immediately, such as the tax credit program. And so that creates more added pressure to find alternative funding sources, which that is not a funding source that the city currently has. That's why we have such a priority on establishing external funding partnerships to be able to fund the preservation program. So if we were just to take a look at a $400,000 per door of an acquisition times 50 units, we can see that just on that alone, it would be, I believe, what is that? 20 or $200 million has been a long day, but it's a relatively high number.
And how much money does the city currently budget per year for acquisition?
So currently, and this was information we had also had the opportunity to frame for council last August during our Affordable Housing 5-year strategic plan study session. The city has housing fees primarily to fund our new project pipeline. It is also available for acquisition preservation work, but in that study session, the priority was to fund our new project pipeline. Primarily the sites that the city does own or will own through land dedication. Through that prioritization, we're projecting that we would already have a $65 or $70 million funding gap just for that. So based on that, we would not have any projected funding sources to do acquisition preservation. What we are doing are a couple of strategies. Number one is to follow the regional housing measure that is going to be lifted up through the Bay Area Housing Finance Agency as part of MTC. And we are tracking that. There is a move towards a regional bond measure. And should that pass, we would be looking to tap into that fund, and it could be significant. The other part is a focus on external partnerships. So, for example, we partnered with the county on a funding partnership with the Measure A funds. We want to build on that partnership approach with other folks, whether it's public agencies, the private sector, or philanthropy, to create additional funding, both for new project development and acquisition preservation. So depending on what our goals are for preservation, we would kind of add on to that $70 million gap for the new project pipeline. Then we would add an X dollar amount for acquisition preservation programs. So what we would do is sort of pair a dollar amount that we would sort of need to create through the partnerships and then add it on to our project pipeline gap funding amount. Right now, what we have in the housing element work plan is at least $10 million. So we would try to develop fundraising or partnerships for 70 million plus the 10 million for at least $80 million.
Yeah, thank you very much, Assistant Community Development Director, for all of that. I did just want to note on one item that I heard from Commissioner Nunez earlier about having a goal or target for how many units go to a community-owned project. I think there's a little bit of a concern about that at this point, not having any entities that exist yet to set that goal. And I don't know if the Assistant Community Development Director can weigh in on that. I know you had some thoughts on it.
I apologize. I have to step away to provide a banana for a hungry 3-year-old. Could you repeat the question, please?
Oh. No, I believe that Commissioner Nunez brought up this idea of having a target number of units that would actually go to a CLT in the housing element. And I know you had some concerns about that, given that we don't actually have any entities at this time. So I just wanted to see if you still had those concerns.
Sorry, it wasn't CLT, it was Copa Topa.
Right.
And or CLT.
Some Copa Topa or CLT, yeah.
If I could provide some additional context for that, typically the way we think about Copa Topa, in other words, Opportunity to Purchase Act programs, is that's primarily a notification process that would be required for a property owner who wants to sell their property, with a requirement to notice either qualified nonprofit developers, that's usually sort of the COPA program, Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, or requirements to notice tenant-based organizations, typically TOPA, Tenant Opportunity Purchase Acts. And then there would be some kind of requirement in terms of either a community-based group, a nonprofit group, or tenant group to then provide an offer, and then some requirements for the property owner to respond to the offer. And so it's largely focused on notification, bidding on the property, and then whether a bid would be accepted by a property owner. That's paired potentially with an acquisition program that provides funding. And then separately, a CLT is really an entity. Right? So you could have an entity that could participate and receive noticing through an OPA program. So these are different components of an acquisition preservation program, with the funding, with the noticing, and then also with entities. And so the CLT would be sort of the entity part of an acquisition preservation program. So I wanted to just provide additional information and clarification about how OPA programs fit into the overall picture.
Can may I make a quick comment on all this, Madam Chair, and then I'll push my button and shut up. The sort of what I'm taking away from this conversation I guess what I'm feeling as a result of this conversation is a note of caution. And it's about the importance of not over-promising and under-delivering, but under-promising and over-delivering. And the reason I think that's important is, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we put a metric in this housing element that later we fail to meet, that is in and of itself grounds to trigger an HCD compliance review. Is that true, or am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, the best programs are ones where we know what we can do and what we have to do, you know, and so we're structuring, you know, a legislative outcome, for example, to meet a certain goal, and those are really the best programs. You know, having a certain outcome that's dependent on a lot of private parties to do something that you want them to do is very risky. And you'll see, you know, I think it was Commissioner Cranston sent me the San Francisco housing element with these items that were like, you know, we're going to do X, or we're going to try to make sure X happens, and if it doesn't happen, then we will do X, right? And that's really ideally how you'd want to structure a program that involves a lot of private parties that you can't necessarily predict or control.
Thank you.
So, Commissioner Cranston, you were next.
So, Commissioner Gutierrez, when I read that section, I was like, 50, what's up with that? But as I thought about it, the comment that we actually don't have these things in place yet came to me. And so I was actually the addition of the other two yellow items in this that says, okay, we're going to find a way to get some money, and we're actually going to put in a plan in place to figure out how to do this. That's what I felt was the right thing to do. If we had experience with this and a track record, you know, then I would feel better about it. But committing to actually learning how to do it was like, okay, I'm cool with that. I would love to see it bigger, but committing to something was a good thing. But these other elements, the finding the $10 million and putting actual programs in place to learn how to do it, was to me a major step. So I'm inclined to accept what staff has drafted here, and I'm very interested to see how these kind of programs can work, and let's go try them. And if they work, 7th cycle, watch out. So.
Commissioner Nunez.
All right, so I heard the word risk, I heard trying new things, and I heard caution. I work in risk management, and so people tell me that my world orientation is related to risk. So let me attempt to de-risk this a little bit, and then I'll tell my colleagues my reasons for why. One possible way of looking at this is taking that third highlighted bullet point, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth bullet point, if you don't have a highlighted version handy, and move that to be the first bullet point. So we're saying, hey, we're going to start by creating a community ownership action plan and setting people up to be able to act as these private parties, right? Like, we're committing to doing that. And then that first bullet point, turn it into the second bullet point and modify it to say, prevent displacement through yada yada, through deed restriction, housing preservation work, and or facilitated acquisitions that arise from community ownership models, structures, community partners. And the reason why I am saying that is because, you know, when I hear about like how much it costs per door, or, you know, like $20 million, 400,000, whatever that feels like. And when I look at the AFFH goal or totals. When I read the housing element that says that the consequence for not having units developed on religious sites is that we will encourage more outreach. Personally, I will not apologize for saying that. To me, that is not affirmatively furthering fair housing. And so instead of saying, I'm going to pound my shoe on the table about that, one other possibility is to say, okay, well, if we're not, in my view, going to affirmatively further fair housing, then that means that we really ought to go as hard as we can in the opposite direction of displacement prevention and mitigation. And so when we think about the people who have been advocating for this COPA-TOPA program, they're not nobody, right? The Solidarity Fund created a whole new operating model, and we're empowered by our city with $1 million to extend into the community, identify ways to deploy those funds, and to keep people in our home. They did that completely on a volunteer basis when the city needed a partner to be able to get that done. And we have motivated people who have experience working with our municipal system, have experience working with funding that comes from our city coffers, and is saying, give us an opportunity. If we're not going to affirmatively further fair housing, then give us an opportunity to stay here to the best extent that we can. We're talking about 50 units. That's, if we look at the RENA, again, if those 265, 285 units, don't get developed or some small number, like those 50 units, we're talking about less than 0.5%, less than 0.5% of our RENA target. I don't want to wait to the 7th cycle, all due respect. I don't think that, if you asked any of our families, can you wait another 8 years? No, they've already learned how to do this. They're smart people, and all they're saying is give us an opportunity. So, to the extent that, we can de-risk this by saying, and or these groups, I don't see what that problem would be, but I'm open to, hearing from my colleagues what the compelling reasons are to deny the opportunity through the housing element.
I'm just going to ask a quick question. It was my understanding that these 2 bullet points are separate and that we'd have 2 opportunities to do different things to achieve the same outcome that you're speaking of. By combining them, it's almost taking away the options. I kind of feel like it's better to have more options. Am I not understanding?
Sure. Yeah, I can clarify. So the problem with that 5th bullet point is there's no, metric associated to that. And the problem with the 1st bullet point is that it does not state that community ownership groups, I'm not talking about CLTs. Personally, I am not a believer in them. I'm talking about COPA-TOPA. If we want to include CLTs, that's fine with me. But the problem is the COPA-TOPA intent one, as Mr. Anderson mentioned, does not have a metric associated to it. And the 1st bullet point that does have the metric associated to it does not mention the COPA-TOPA groups. So what I'm asking for is that we just include COPA-TOPA as one vehicle available for acquiring, I would still say 100, but if we're going to do 50, that we add COPA-TOPA for a vehicle for acquiring those 50 housing units.
Commissioner Gutierrez, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone, for participating in this conversation. Very useful. It's very helpful. And what I wanted to do, since we're in a discussion mode, is to also bring to light that when we look at the community feedback, we have various groups who have been participating. I applaud Farella for their advice, Alta Housing, and the League of Women Voters. And having said that, when I look at the Solidarity Fund, I mentioned this to one of the ladies because who are members of the group, because they were saying, look, this is what we're looking at, this is what our intent is, and they gave me their feedback on that front. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, Jose, you, Alex, the other members of the committee, you're so involved, along with the city attorney and Eric and the rest of the team from the city of Mountain View, to try and make a positive difference in our community. And up to this point, none of you brought up the issue of what was brought to your attention by this group. So I applauded them and I said, thank you for participating because this is what we need. This is the type of feedback and praxis that the community wanted from us in the first place. And you're providing that because none of us here at the dais came up with that. So I would like to reiterate, if we can look at things differently from a different vantage point, though there is risk involved, I want to remind everyone that we still are dealing with a hypothetical situation when that state's not mandating you to do X, Y, Z, and this is how you're going to do it. And we're coming up with our best intent to provide a plan to meet objectives and goals that are realistic in general, knowing full well that we're at the mercy of property owners who may not buy into this program, or big tech companies who may not want to have their unused parking lot spaces pitch in with anything at all because they've already made their deals with other cities around the Bay Area, like San Jose. And so when I look at it from that perspective, there's nothing to lose and everything to gain, though I understand the issue of risk and in terms of financing and partnerships and what we can then provide to the HCD, and if we don't meet a certain goal or criteria, that may be an issue. I totally get that. But I would like to also reiterate that a lot of these suggestions are being brought forth to us right here, right now, by different groups that were not here at the table. And I appreciate their ability to convey those ideas, which some of them have now been enacted in the revised exhibit that we have here now, and we see those changes and track changes. And I appreciate that. So having said that, I'm gonna move on to another issue. And if you all would like to support what Alex and I were thinking about in terms of increasing the numbers or moving the bullet points, that would be greatly appreciated. If not, then, you know, it is what it is, but, you know, people will pay attention. So having said that, when I look at the issue of 3.2, the displacement prevention and mitigation, again, under objective and metrics, I look here at the last bullet point where it says, study amendments to the Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance, MHRSO in parens, that reduce annual allowable rent increases. I then turn to the next page where it says milestones and timeframes, and it says here, under the third bullet point, study updates to MHRSO by December 31st, 2027. And like I said before, we work towards progressing change at a faster rate, and I think that 2027 is a little bit too long. I can understand your hesitancy in wanting to have increased numbers for the first bullet point that we spoke about previously because of certain risks involved. But when it comes down to 2027, for these other folks who have been who are affected negatively by the economic situation in general that they're held against, that's too long of a wait. There is no time. Our communities have no time. Even with rent control, it's year to year. Their world, our world, is so different. I don't know that we really understand that. So I would like to humbly suggest if we can revise that date from 2027 to something more like 2024 or 2025. What say you?
Okay, for clarification, just because there are a couple of things that are out there, and you had mentioned perhaps Commissioner Nunez's idea was something that you would be for, I'm going to ask if there is a motion for a specific change from either one of you.
So I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding how this would work. Are we allowed to make a motion on a specific program, or are we going to compile all of the suggested edits and then vote on here's the draft housing element at the very end and try to get it all in one fell swoop?
The plan was after discussion here, we were going to go ahead and get a vote on the whole thing with whatever changes we vote on in the interim, I suppose. We should probably go ahead and vote on the potential changes, each one first, before we get the final. We could.
Yeah, you could definitely do a straw poll if it seems like, and so far we have comments from Commissioner Cranston about moving forward or having a specific date for Treo updates. We have a comment from Commissioner Gutierrez to increase the number of acquisition units, and from Commissioner Nunez to explicitly say that those acquisition units can be for community ownership, as well as to prioritize the community ownership action in item 3.2. And then, of course, Gutierrez's last action to do updates to the mobile home rent stabilization ordinance sooner. That's what I have so far. It sounds like we've got quite a few things that are coming up, so it might make more sense to do straw polls on each of them, and then after the fact, whoever motions the housing element itself would list those things that get the majority straw polls.
Okay, since we have the several items, let's go ahead and we can take a straw poll on the individual ones, starting with. Sorry.
There might be more. You might.
That is true. That is true. Okay, I see the list has grown here for speakers. Pardon. All right, Vice Chair Dempsey.
And just to clarify, we're not straw polling yet. We're just
not right now,
adding straws.
If we're doing it this way, let's get the full list, and then we'll straw poll each one, and then do the final.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, I actually kind of wanted to follow on to what Commissioner Gutierrez was saying, and I have a few thoughts. Let me start with timelines. I actually kind of agree with Commissioner Gutierrez that I am concerned that some of those timelines are a bit long, and I guess I can tell you why. In talking to some of the groups who raised timelines as an issue, I think what I walked away aware of was, for some of us here, it may be a question, it may be somewhat an academic question, and honestly, I get caught up thinking about scheduling and when are we going to get all this done by, and does Eric have enough staff to get it all done in time, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, for some folks, this is very urgent, very real, and very present, and it's right in their face, and that's important. That matters to me. Some of these things are I wouldn't quite go so far as to say maybe life and death, but it's about the stability of their household, and that had an impact on me when I talked to some of those folks, and so I don't know what the right way to deal with some of those timelines are. I mean, last time we were in here, I kind of pitched a fit about work plans and do we have too many things and when are they going to be done and why do they take so long? And I really do hope we have a good detailed conversation about work plan, because I want to make sure anything we promise, we're going to be able to deliver. And I think attached to that or adjacent to that, at some point we should maybe have a conversation or at least flag, is your department's staff to handle all the promises that we're making. And if they're not, maybe we should talk about that, right? I hope that when we sit down to do more work planning, we can actually maybe knock some things off, because there's a lot of stuff in here that's actually really urgent to a lot of folks, and some other things that we kind of found out we sort of forgot about, and it just sat on the list and it wasn't super urgent, and maybe we get to it, maybe we don't, right? For some people, the things that we're talking about here, I am very, very convinced by what Commissioner Gutierrez is saying. It is really urgent. And so I think there should be a conversation about a few of these things that maybe we could speed up, because not all of these issues are going to be equal. One other thing I wanted to say about COPAs, TOPAs, CLTs, all that stuff, I hope we have a conversation about that, because I think it's intriguing, and actually the reason why I kind of recently only became aware of it and now actually think it's a conversation worth having, was talking to the ladies of the Fondo. And from that, what I took is, it is really important to be able to hold your fate in your own hands and to not have your fate be in someone else's hands. And that really impacted me when I heard it from them. And so I hope we have that conversation. I would say, this isn't the only time we're ever going to get to do it. We can still do things even if we don't put them in the housing element. And I hope that we do talk about it, because I think it's worth talking about. That's enough for me for now.
Okay, Commissioner Haymeyer.
Thank you. Just briefly, I want to echo a lot of what Vice Chair Dempsey raised. I think throughout this, particularly in the conversation about adding metrics and timelines, I have real concerns about all the things we're saying we're going to do in the staffing capacity. So I don't want to lose sight of that. But I think what I heard from Wayne is really thinking about 3.2. We're building the plane as we're flying it to some extent. And I would be perfectly comfortable thinking about how we can work with groups like the Solidarity Fund to figure out what those metrics are. I have spent at least 20 weeks of my life in thinking deeply about NOAA acquisition, and it's really hard and really complicated, and I'm not necessarily convinced it's the best economic outcome. I think holding your fate in your own hands is really critical. I just want to make sure that we've done the infrastructure, because it is about funding, it's about being opportunistic, and it's about a lot of other things. And so I'm shying away from the idea of let's put a number down, because we don't know what property is going to come online. We don't know what the property owner would be like. So that piece makes me uneasy, but I think the general tenor of thinking about how can we really make sure that this is actionable and going to make a difference in this housing cycle, I totally am on board with. But I just wanted to make sure that every time we're putting on a new, we're going to do this by 2024 or 2025, there needs to be a real understanding of who in the city is capable of tracking all of this, because just seeing what it takes to put forward the plan, let alone execute it, has been a tremendous amount of work by staff and our consultants, and I really don't want to lose sight about how many hours it has taken to get to this point. And then I'm excited to execute on it, but we might need to build the team.
Commissioner Nunez.
Yep. I just want to make sure I clarified that prioritization of the item, as silly as this is going to sound, me saying move that to the first bullet point was like a rhetorical visual aid. That said, really what I'm saying, it's one simple thing, is that in that first bullet point, after, deed restriction and housing preservation work, that we just redlined the and between restriction and housing, turn it to a comma, or I guess just get rid of the and then add comma and or COPA, TOPA. We all know that the antidote to risk is diversification. So all we're saying here is that we would have another tool in the toolbox to get the 50 housing units that we are already committing to in that bullet point. That is it. And I'm very supportive, again, I'll iterate, of the trail review. And I'm also supportive of the MHRSO review. It seems to me that because it's contained within this 3.2, and because we have a whole city apparatus that is converging on this in the next 1 to 2 years, that it actually is a very timely and relevant review to dovetail into that work that's already ongoing.
Point of clarification is just to ask, then you are, later on, when we do the straw poll, it'll be to combine, do what you asked, but not have the number.
I'm happy to write it.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, thanks. And then I will ask Commissioner Gutierrez then if that is what you are advocating for as well, if you wanted to.
I would agree with that. That's fine with me. The issue of 50 or 100, that's been discussed. And 50 is realistic, which is great, right? As long as we adhere to it and make it happen. So the suggestions that Alex has, I would agree to.
So we can combine those into one.
Right, with the inclusion of the Copa Topa language, which Alex is writing right now.
Yes.
Thank you.
Of course. Commissioner Cranston.
Two questions. First for staff. I didn't read the first bullet as precluding the things later. I didn't. Do you feel that as written it would prevent the community ownership models as being part of that process? That's the first question. I didn't see them as excluding it. I have no problem with adding it, but it didn't seem like bullet 1 would preclude community ownership models as one of those methods. Do you feel that it does?
I don't think that was our intent in writing it, that it would preclude it. I'm going to defer to the Assistant Community Development Director as the author of that language.
Yes, thank you. Correct. The first bullet is not meant to preclude bullet point number 5. It was intended to provide some flexibility, and which would also provide the opportunity for a community ownership model to be able to participate in the 50 units. I also just wanted to make a note. I don't know if this might just be sort of shifting where an existing bullet resides, but I believe Mr. Anderson, under item 2.1, there is already language about an OPA program, and that could potentially be shifted to be added to the displacement response 3.2 item. That really is where OPA is meant to address. So it may just be sort of shifting existing bullet point language to 3.2 from 2.1, but I'm going to ask if Mr. Anderson can confirm the OPA language in 2.1.
So yeah, it may not be in the exhibit. It may have to be in the, it is in the, on page 44 of the housing element, page 104 of the resolution. And it does say mitigate displacement from a range of unit types, including apartments and mobile homes through community-centered programs, possibly including Copa Topa or community land trusts. And then we have an update to the council on the suitability of community land trusts or Copa Topa to address unmet needs. If directed by council, develop a program within 5 years. So that is already in 2.1. It does sound like the just kind of coming back to the assistant director's response to Commissioner Cranston's question that the language there was already seen as including the language in 3.2. We could actually also move this language from 2.1 to 3.2 as this assistant director is saying.
And then my second question was, would Commissioner Nunez consider just using the word community ownership model rather than limiting it specifically to COPA and TOPA? Is that a yes?
It's in there. He's got it in there.
Okay. So, all right.
So I'm going to make a quick suggestion, if you guys don't mind. How I understood it was that you were going to combine the first bullet point with the other one, the fifth, into one. But I almost feel like it is better to have it separate so that they're each getting its own weight. Or you could combine it as you've put your writing it out now, and leave the 50 as a number so that you at least have that, because by combining it into one, I feel like you're actually taking away the opportunity for more diverse options.
Yep, so my desire is not to combine them. It is only to, here. It is only to add, and it sounds like the 2.1 solution can play well here, because, sorry to say that to the people I work with, I'm not sorry to say, to the people I work with, clarity does matter. It matters to be extra affirmative. And so if we have the 2.1 workaround where we can kind of replicate that into 3.2, that would work as well. Otherwise, Chair Yin, I have no interest in changing anything around bullet point number 5, and only adding, after housing preservation work, the and/or COPA/TOPA/community ownership model structures.
I understand.
To acquire the 50.
Thank you. Okay. Do I need to repeat that to everybody so that we're clear? I will anyways. Okay. So the motion on the floor would be to keep 3.2, bullet point 1, prevent displacement through rent stabilization, deed restriction, and housing preservation work, and COPA/TOPA/community ownership models to acquire and preserve at least 50 housing units that would remain da-da-da-da. We would keep point 5 as is, and maybe fold in language from 4.1, I believe it was, that was mentioned earlier by Mr. Chen. 2.1, thank you. That was mentioned by Community Director Chen, into, would it be the first bullet point or the 5th? I guess it doesn't matter, that's technical. Where it gets added, as long as it's added.
Right. I mean, there is something of a, it's a good catch, and I think we're probably going to have to figure out, offline, how best to integrate the 2 points, because in a way they're saying the same thing, but they're also saying slightly different things. One of them is saying that we're checking in with council on creating a structure, and then this one's saying that we're just going to create the structure. So I think we're going to have to do a little bit of tracking and correction as we move them in. I think the direction to do so from the EPC is adequate from a policy level, and I think we'll make it work together.
Okay, thank you. Is that?
Just to clarify then, if, I'd be more than happy to leave the how to fold in language question to staff to sort through that as we're bringing that back to the city council. And to the extent that, as Commissioner Cranston noted, it doesn't preclude, yet there's a lot of value in clarifying. I would say that it would be, I would still leave on the floor that desire to move at least that first bullet point, a slight modification to include at the end of the first sentence, comma, and COPA/TOPA/community ownership models, period, and then keep the rest as is.
Noted. Staff noted. Thank you. Oh, I believe there's, no longer wanting to speak? Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Gutierrez, you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for this ability to problem solve on the fly. And the reason why I bring this up right now, it's pretty simple. When you translate these documents into Spanish, it's literal. So when you don't see the exact language of COPA/TOPA, what have you, from my perspective and the perspective I've heard of Spanish speakers in general, there is no assumption that it's not part of this analysis or option 2 because they don't see it. We don't read it. The language isn't there. And so that's just a subtle difference there in terms of how you interpret language from English to Spanish or Spanish to English. And I appreciate that this was caught in terms of 2.1, that we can rearrange that and bring that into the folder 3.2. And the suggestions made by Alex and everyone here in general moves us forward together to a place where we feel more comfortable in. We appreciate that very much. So thank you all.
No more comments, discussion points? Okay. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 points, and we're going to go ahead and take a straw poll on those. I will list them. The first was Commissioner Cranston's motion to up the timeline of the trail to, I believe, December 2024. So I'll go ahead and take a straw poll. Oh, sorry. Vice Chair Dempsey, you had something to say?
Yeah, if we're going to move up timelines, I just want to have a quick logic check with staff that that is in fact feasible, because I don't want to sign up for something that's impossible or going to break the wheel.
Well, I think that December date actually came from the assistant director himself. So unless he's changed his mind in the last couple of minutes.
Yeehaw.
We believe that December 2024 would fold in well with our displacement response strategy work, so we can use that date.
Chair, a quick question of Wayne.
Yes, go for it.
Mr. Chen, quick question. To what extent would it also be either viable or otherwise to roll the MHRSO review into the same time frame? Because it might make sense to just vote on those two together.
Thanks for that question. So I'm just going to scroll down on my screen to that. I believe currently it says 2027. I believe, and maybe I can also just confirm with Mr. Anderson, that the timing for the ordinance review initially was based on the ordinance was recently put into place, and that oftentimes a first check-in would be, say, after 5 years, and then look at how programs have been functioning. We have now heard that, based on the community, that there is a very urgent need now to review. So I think that what we could do, if this is okay with the commission, to take this back after the meeting and see if we can identify an earlier date, and we can include that comment in the staff report to council and make a recommendation if we can for an earlier date. I wouldn't need to check with staff to make sure that we can do this, but I want to be able to take a look at all the programs that we are committing to before 2025 and just work that out if that's okay. But we can provide an analysis and also information in the council report when we bring this to council next month.
Okay. So is that okay with everyone? Those who moved in? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, let's move forward then. So the straw poll for the TREO timeline review moved to December 2024. Straw poll, please. Raise your hands. Okay, that's unanimous. Staff could note that. The second point was the combination of Commissioner Gutierrez and Commissioner Nunez to add under 3.2, displacement prevention and mitigation, the first bullet point. In there, in addition to the rent stabilization, deed restriction, and housing preservation, we're going to add COPA-TOPA/community ownership models, and then continue the sentence that way. Straw poll? Excellent. Unanimous. We also have the MHRSO timeline, and we are going to take a straw poll that if Community Director Chen can find an expedited time, that we are all for it. Straw poll, please. Unanimous. So I don't believe I'm missing anything else. Staff, do you see anything that I may have missed?
Commissioner Gutierrez brought up the idea of increasing the number of units in 3.2 to 100.
Thank you. I think
Sizes?
I'll let him confirm, but I believe he retracted.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay, well, I believe we are at a point where we could request a motion. And I see one from, is this from Commissioner Nunez, and then a seconder, Commissioner Clark. Could we go ahead? Yeah, I believe they will have to read it with the changes, please. Yes.
Can I make a suggestion that'll make it shorter potentially? So you could move the staff recommendation together with revised Exhibit E that's been presented to the commission tonight and the following changes that you just voted on. And list them.
Yep, so, Chair Yin, would you mind giving me the little reference and then that piece of paper too, if you don't mind, just so I can, with the, if that's okay. Okay. So I make a motion to move the staff recommendation for approval of the draft housing element along with the updated Exhibit E and with the following changes that under 3.2 displacement prevention and mitigation under the housing programs, that the first bullet point be changed to state prevent displacement through rent stabilization, deed restriction, housing preservation work, and COPA/TOPA/community ownership models to acquire and preserve at least 50 housing units that would remain affordable, e.g. around 30% of household income. Eviction levels should not increase or preferably should be lowered. In addition to housing programs, item number 3.2, displacement prevention and mitigation, that the timeline for the trail review be moved upward to December of 2024. I believe that might be December 31st of 2024. And that the timeline review for the MHRSO pending a review from Community Development Director Wayne Chen be also tentatively scheduled for a possible advance on the review date. Does that work, Ms. Lee?
That's fine, Commissioner. Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries unanimously.
Just wanted to clarify for those who are just listening in that the motion was by Commissioner Nunez and seconded by Commissioner Clark.
Yes, so thank you very much, everyone here. I knew it was a Herculean endeavor on all parts. Now, we've closed with that. We will now go to agenda item 6, Commission staff announcements, updates, requests, and committee reports. No action will be taken on any questions raised by the Commission at this time.
The only report that I have at this time is a reminder that we do have a meeting next week. We don't usually have them 2 in a row, and I apologize, but we do have a couple items next week, the office building on Bernardo and the council work plan.
Commissioner Cranston, did you have an announcement?
I'll send it to Mr. Anderson. There is a session in San Francisco, I believe it's on March 28th, on housing options, and it looked kind of interesting. Since I work in San Francisco, it's easy. Probably be harder for everybody else to get to, but I'll send it to Mr. Anderson to share with folks if they have any interest in trying to attend.
Thank you. Commissioner Gutierrez.
Yes, I just want to quickly thank everyone on the EPC because we worked together as a team. We problem solved on the fly. We had help from the staff, and we made positive progress on this housing element plan. And I appreciate your help very much, and the community does as well. Thank you. Gracias.
Vice Chair Dempsey.
Would it be appropriate to make a similar comment related to the housing element, even though the thing itself has passed? Is that okay to say?
Yes, please.
I wanted to commend staff because housing element was a big lift. It was a long project, long process. I know, we only saw the edges of how hard you had to work on it. I particularly commend all the changes and the consideration and the outreach that you did in the last few weeks to really get this thing ready for HCD. So just, I wanted to express my profound gratitude for staff and how much y'all put into this. And not only that, how much you went out into the community to bring that into it as well. And that I'm kind of encouraged, and I feel better having watched that. I think y'all did a good job on something that was really hard, really, really hard. And my hope would be that, a special thanks to all the groups that have already sent in support letters. I think having support letters for the housing element is actually really important because HCD is paying attention and they want to know. So if we should never let the perfect be the enemy of the good. My plea would be that all those community groups, if you care about this stuff, please consider sending in a support letter to support the housing element, support the city. We should put a united front forward when we go to HCD because we're all going to sink or swim together. So that would be my plea to anybody who's listening. If you haven't sent in a support letter, please do so because I think it matters. And it reflects, I think, a lot of good work that was done by everybody sitting here and a whole bunch of folks who aren't.
All right. If there are no more items to discuss, we will now adjourn at 10:40. Is that right? 10:41. Thank you, everyone, for all the work.